Welcome, traveller of time, to tonight's gentle descent into the quiet corners of history. Whether you're resting after a long day or simply seeking a moment of calm, I'm grateful to have you here. Do let me know where you're listening from and what hour it is for you. I imagine us as glowing dots on a spinning globe, connected by curiosity and the hush of night. And if this peaceful storytelling brings a little stillness to your day, feel free to subscribe. We'll have many more historical tales to share. In this world, every action carried weight beyond its immediate purpose. The way you put on your shoes, the direction you faced while praying, even how you stirred your morning porridge, all of these mundane activities were laden with supernatural significance. Medieval people lived in a universe where God and the devil waged eternal war, where angels and demons walked among mortals, and where the natural world itself was alive with magical properties. Consider Margaret, a baker's wife in a small English village circa 1347. As she rises before dawn to help her husband prepare the day's bread, her actions follow a careful choreography passed down through generations. She crosses herself 3 times before touching the flour, whispers a prayer to Saint Honoratus, the patron saint of bakers, and carefully avoids looking at the dough while it rises. For everyone knows that a woman's direct gaze during her monthly courses could cause the bread to fall flat and refuse to rise properly. Margaret's morning routine might seem quaint to us, but in her world, these weren't mere customs. They were matters of survival. A failed batch of bread could mean the difference between profit and poverty, between feeding her family and watching them go hungry. In an age where understanding of natural processes was limited, supernatural explanations filled the gaps, providing both comfort and terror in equal measure. The medieval mind operated on the principle that everything in creation was connected by invisible threads of influence. The movement of celestial bodies affected earthly events. The behavior of animals predicted weather and disaster. Plants growing in certain patterns revealed hidden truths about the future. Even the human body was a microcosm of the universe, with each part corresponding to planetary influences and divine will. Take the humble act of sneezing, something we barely notice today. In medieval times, a sneeze was a moment of profound spiritual vulnerability. The sudden, violent expulsion of air from the body was believed to temporarily separate the soul from its earthly vessel, creating a dangerous opening for malevolent spirits to enter. This is why people immediately said, "God bless you," not as a polite courtesy, but as an urgent spiritual protection, a verbal shield thrown up against demonic invasion. The direction of the sneeze mattered too. A sneeze to the right was considered fortunate, suggesting divine approval. A sneeze to the left warned of impending misfortune. 3 sneezes in a row meant someone was speaking ill of you, while a sneeze at the dinner table foretold the arrival of unexpected guests before the meal was finished. But sneezing was just the beginning. Medieval people lived surrounded by omens and portents that required constant interpretation. The way smoke rose from a chimney could predict the weather for the coming week. Straight, ascending smoke meant fair skies, while smoke that curled and twisted warned of storms. Smoke that refused to rise at all suggested that witchcraft was at work, perhaps a neighbor casting malevolent spells. Animals, too, were viewed as messengers from the spiritual realm. Dogs howling at night didn't simply indicate their discomfort. They were announcing the presence of death itself, either approaching the household or already walking among the living as a restless spirit. Cats, those mysterious creatures who moved silently through shadows, were particularly suspect. A black cat crossing your path wasn't merely bad luck. It was a clear sign that Satan himself was taking an interest in your affairs. Ravens and crows held special significance as creatures that dwelt on the boundary between life and death. Their harsh cries were believed to be the voices of the damned, warning the living of approaching doom. When these birds gathered in unusual numbers, entire villages would prepare for plague, war, or famine. The sight of a single raven perched on a church steeple was so ominous that some parishes would ring the bells to drive it away, fearing that its presence would call down divine wrath upon the congregation. Even the behavior of domestic animals carried supernatural weight. If a horse refused to pass a certain spot on the road, it wasn't mere stubbornness. The animal was sensing the presence of ghosts or demons invisible to human eyes. Wise travelers would heed such warnings, finding alternate routes rather than risk encountering whatever evil spirits had claimed that particular patch of earth. The medieval calendar itself was a complex web of auspicious and inauspicious days. Some dates were considered so unlucky that important activities were forbidden entirely. January 1st, March 28th, April 10th, August 1st, and December 6th were known as Egyptian days, periods when the veil between worlds grew thin and supernatural forces gained unusual power. No physician would perform surgery on these days, no farmer would plant crops, and no merchant would begin a new venture. Even getting married during an Egyptian day was believed to doom the union to misery and early death. The phases of the moon governed a surprising array of human activities. Haircut during a waxing moon would grow back thick and lustrous, while haircut during the waning moon would grow slowly and might even fall out entirely. Pregnant women took special care to track lunar cycles, believing that children born during a full moon would be blessed with strength and intelligence, while those born during a new moon might be cursed with madness or deformity. Childbirth itself was surrounded by countless superstitions designed to protect both mother and child during their most vulnerable time. Iron objects were placed around the birthing bed to ward off fairies who might steal the newborn and leave a changeling in its place. Salt was scattered on the threshold to prevent demons from entering the room. The mother's wedding ring was placed on her thumb during labor, symbolically ensuring that the child would be born into a blessed union. The moment of birth brought its own set of supernatural considerations. A child born with a caul, a membrane covering the face, was destined for greatness, but also marked for supernatural attention throughout life. Such children were believed to possess the gift of second sight, able to see ghosts and predict the future. The caul itself was carefully preserved and often sold to sailors, who believed it would protect them from drowning. The day of the week on which a child was born determined their fundamental character and fate. The old rhyme captured these beliefs. Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace, Wednesday's child is full of woe, Thursday's child has far to go, Friday's child is loving and giving, Saturday's child works hard for a living, but the child born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay. Parents would plan conception carefully, hoping to ensure their children were born on favorable days. Names, too, carried supernatural power. A child named after a saint gained that holy figure's protection throughout life, but also inherited their particular temptations and trials. Parents studied saints' lives carefully before choosing names, weighing the benefits of divine protection against the risks of sharing a saint's suffering. Names of demons or biblical villains were absolutely forbidden, as they might invite malevolent influences into the child's life. The medieval church both encouraged and attempted to control these beliefs, walking a careful line between condemning pagan superstitions and acknowledging the spiritual realities that ordinary people experience daily. Church bells weren't just calls to worship. They were powerful weapons against evil spirits. The sound of consecrated bronze was believed to shatter demonic influence and drive away malevolent forces. During thunderstorms, church bells would ring continuously, their sacred tones battling against the supernatural chaos of the tempest. Holy water became a multi-purpose spiritual tool, sprinkled not just on people but on crops, livestock, and homes to provide divine protection. Farmers would carry vials of blessed water to their fields, sprinkling it on seeds to ensure good harvests and ward off blight. Merchants would sprinkle it on their goods to prevent theft and ensure fair profits. Even soldiers carried holy water into battle, believing it would turn aside enemy blades and arrows. The proliferation of saints in medieval Christianity partly reflected this need for supernatural protection in every aspect of life. There was a patron saint for virtually every profession, ailment, and concern. St. Anthony protected against fire and plague. St. Christopher guarded travellers. St. Apollonia eased toothaches. St. Agatha protected against lightning and volcanic eruptions. St. Blaise cured throat ailments. The list went on, creating a vast celestial bureaucracy of specialized divine helpers. Relics, physical remains or belongings of saints, were considered to possess concentrated supernatural power. A splinter of wood from the true cross, a fragment of St. Peter's bone, a thread from the Virgin Mary's robe. These items were worth more than gold and were believed capable of working miracles. Towns and monasteries competed fiercely to acquire powerful relics, knowing they would attract pilgrims and provide spiritual protection for the entire community. The authentication of relics became a complex process involving church officials, but the demand was so great that forgeries flourished. Medieval Europe contained enough splinters of the true cross to build several complete crosses, and enough milk teeth of the infant Jesus to fill a small bag. Yet people's faith in these objects remained unshaken, perhaps because the spiritual comfort they provided was very real, regardless of their physical authenticity. Pilgrimages to holy sites were partly devotional journeys and partly supernatural quests for healing and protection. The road to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, where the Apostle James was buried, was believed to offer spiritual purification to all who completed the arduous journey. Canterbury Cathedral, site of Thomas Becket's martyrdom, drew crowds seeking miraculous healing. Rome itself was a vast repository of sacred power, where every church contained relics and every street corner had witnessed divine intervention. But supernatural beliefs extended far beyond official church doctrine, into realms that made clergy deeply uncomfortable. Folk magic thrived alongside Christianity, offering practical solutions to everyday problems through rituals that blended prayer with practices that bordered on witchcraft. Village wise women knew which herbs to gather under specific moon phases for maximum potency. They could predict the weather by observing the behavior of spiders, cure warts by rubbing them with stolen coins, and protect crops from hail by burying blessed candles at the four corners of fields. Love magic was particularly popular, though officially forbidden by the church. Young women would perform elaborate rituals to attract desired suitors or test the faithfulness of current lovers. Eating an apple while gazing into a mirror at midnight on Halloween would reveal the face of one's future husband. Placing bay leaves under one's pillow on St. Agnes's Eve would bring prophetic dreams of marriage. Carrying a mandrake root, a plant believed to grow beneath gallows where innocent men had been hanged, would ensure irresistible attractiveness to the opposite sex. The mandrake itself exemplified the strange intersection of botany and supernatural belief in medieval minds. This plant, with its vaguely human-shaped root, was thought to scream when pulled from the earth, and anyone who heard that scream would die instantly. The solution was to tie a rope around the root and attach the other end to a dog, then frighten the dog into running away and pulling up the plant. The dog would die from hearing the mandrake scream, but the human harvester would survive to claim the valuable root. Weather prediction was another area where supernatural beliefs flourished. Professional weather prophets claimed to read signs in everything from the color of sunset clouds to the thickness of onion skins. A red sky at night meant fair weather ahead because it showed God's pleasure with human behavior that day. A red sky in the morning warned of divine anger and approaching storms. Unusual cloud formations were interpreted as heavenly armies preparing for spiritual warfare, with earthly weather as a side effect of celestial battles. The behavior of farm animals provided additional weather clues. Cows lying down in the pasture meant rain was coming within hours. They were seeking dry spots before the storm hit. Pigs gathering sticks and building nests indicated a harsh winter ahead. Chickens refusing to venture far from the coop warned of severe weather within days. Even insects were consulted. Spiders spinning larger webs predicted rain, while ants building higher hills foretold flooding. Seasonal celebrations were elaborate attempts to maintain harmony between human communities and the supernatural forces that governed natural cycles. Christmas wasn't just about celebrating Christ's birth. It was a crucial time for ensuring the sun's return after the longest night of the year. Candles burned in every window to call back the light, while evergreen decorations symbolized life's persistence through winter's death. The Yule log, carefully selected and blessed, would burn for 12 days, its flames holding back the forces of darkness that grew strongest during the winter solstice. Easter celebrations combined Christian resurrection themes with older beliefs about spring's return and the earth's renewal. Eggs, symbols of new life, were decorated and blessed, then eaten to absorb their life-giving properties. The Easter fire, kindled from flint and steel rather than existing flames, represented the pure light of Christ conquering death. Water blessed at Easter was considered especially powerful, capable of healing the sick and protecting crops throughout the growing season. May Day festivities acknowledged the dangerous beauty of spring's full arrival. When supernatural forces were believed to be at their most active, young people would venture into forests before dawn to gather flowers and branches. But they also risked encounters with fairies, elves, and other woodland spirits who might bless or curse them depending on their behavior. The maypole itself was a sacred tree, its ribbons representing the connections between earth and sky, human and divine, natural and supernatural. Harvest festivals weren't just celebrations of successful crops, they were elaborate Thanksgiving rituals designed to maintain divine favor for the coming year. The last sheaf of grain was often shaped into a corn dolly, a figure representing the spirit of the harvest that would be kept through winter and returned to the fields at planting time. First fruits were always offered to God and the saints before humans could partake, ensuring continued supernatural protection for future crops. The medieval understanding of the human body was deeply influenced by supernatural beliefs that would seem bizarre to modern medical practitioners. The four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, weren't just biological fluids but spiritual essences that connected humans to cosmic forces. Blood was associated with air and spring, representing hope and vitality. Phlegm connected to water and winter, bringing calm and reflection. Yellow bile linked to fire and summer, generating energy and ambition. Black bile tied to earth and autumn, causing melancholy and introspection. Illness wasn't simply physical malfunction, but spiritual imbalance that could be caused by sin, demonic influence, or cosmic misalignment. Treatment required addressing supernatural as well as physical causes. Physicians would consult astrological charts to determine the best times for bloodletting or surgery, believing that planetary positions affected the success of medical procedures. Mercury governed communication and travel, so ailments of the mouth and legs were best treated when Mercury was favorably positioned. Venus ruled love and beauty, making it the ideal time to treat skin conditions and reproductive disorders. The practice of bloodletting itself was based on supernatural as well as medical theory. Removing excess blood wasn't just about balancing the humours, it was about releasing spiritual corruption that had entered the body through sin or demonic influence. The blood was carefully examined after extraction, with its colour, consistency, and smell, providing clues about the spiritual state of the patient's soul. Dreams were considered direct communications from the supernatural realm, requiring careful interpretation by those skilled in divine symbolism. Dreaming of clear water meant spiritual purification and good fortune ahead. Muddy or turbulent water warned of spiritual contamination and approaching troubles. Dreams of flying indicated the soul's temporary liberation from earthly constraints, often preceding spiritual revelations or prophetic visions. Animals in dreams carried specific meanings that had been codified through centuries of spiritual tradition. Dreaming of white horses meant divine messages were coming, while black horses warned of demonic temptation. Sheep represented innocence and divine protection, while wolves symbolized spiritual predators seeking to destroy the soul. Birds in dreams often carried messages from deceased loved ones or warnings from guardian angels. The interpretation of dreams became a specialized skill, with some individuals gaining reputations as divine interpreters, whose services were sought by everyone from peasants to nobility. These dream readers would consider not just the symbols that appeared, but also the dreamer's spiritual state, recent behavior, and position in the lunar cycle. A dream that might be positive for a virtuous person could be ominous for someone living in sin. Death itself was surrounded by elaborate supernatural beliefs designed to ease the dying person's transition to the afterlife and protect the living from spiritual contamination. The moment of death was considered extremely dangerous, as the departing soul was vulnerable to demonic interception, while evil spirits might attempt to enter the vacated body. Candles were kept burning around the deathbed to provide spiritual illumination, while blessed salt was scattered on the threshold to prevent demons from entering the room. The behavior of animals around the dying was carefully observed for supernatural significance. If a dog howled while someone was dying, it meant the person's soul was being contested between angels and demons. Cats leaving the house during someone's final illness suggested that evil spirits were already claiming victory. Birds tapping at windows were thought to be souls of the already dead, coming to escort the dying person to the afterlife. The treatment of the body after death required careful attention to supernatural considerations. The corpse was positioned with feet toward the door, symbolically ready for the soul's journey to heaven. Coins were placed on the eyes, not just to keep them closed, but to pay the spiritual toll for crossing into the afterlife. Mirrors in the house were covered to prevent the soul from becoming trapped in reflections, while clocks were stopped to mark the exact moment when earthly time ended for the deceased. The 3 days between death and burial were considered especially perilous, as the soul was believed to linger near the body before making its final journey. Family members would maintain constant vigil, praying continuously and watching for signs of supernatural activity. Strange sounds, unexplained lights, or sudden temperature changes were interpreted as evidence of spiritual warfare over the deceased person's eternal fate. Funeral processions followed routes carefully chosen to avoid crossroads where evil spirits were believed to congregate. The church bells would toll continuously during the journey, their sacred sound clearing the path of demonic interference. Holy water was sprinkled liberally on the coffin and grave, while blessed herbs were scattered to purify the burial site and protect it from desecration by supernatural forces. The positioning of graves within the churchyard reflected beliefs about spiritual hierarchy and supernatural protection. Burial close to the church building itself was reserved for the most virtuous members of the community, as proximity to consecrated ground provided maximum protection from demonic interference. Suicides and suspected witches were buried in unconsecrated ground outside the churchyard walls, where their potentially corrupted souls couldn't contaminate the blessed earth or influence other graves. The treatment of suspected supernatural threats within the community required careful balance between Christian mercy and practical protection. Accusations of witchcraft were taken seriously, but investigated thoroughly, as false accusations could bring divine judgment upon accusers. The medieval church distinguished between harmful malefic magic and beneficial white magic, though both were officially forbidden as they relied on supernatural forces outside divine authority. Suspected witches were identified through various supernatural tests that seem bizarre to modern sensibilities. The water ordeal involved binding the accused and throwing them into blessed water. If they floated, the holy water was rejecting them as corrupted by evil, proving their guilt. If they sank, they were innocent but might drown in the process of proving it. The hot iron ordeal required suspects to carry heated metal for a specific distance. If their burns healed cleanly within 3 days, God was protecting them as innocent, but infected wounds indicated divine judgment against the guilty. The fear of witchcraft reflected deeper anxieties about the permeable boundary between Christian and pagan beliefs in medieval society. Many practices condemned as witchcraft were actually remnants of pre-Christian religions that had never been fully suppressed. Healing with herbs, predicting weather through natural observation, and maintaining harmony with seasonal cycles were traditional skills that became suspect when filtered through Christian theology about supernatural evil. Village-wise women occupied a particularly precarious position in this spiritual landscape. Their knowledge of herbal medicine, midwifery, and folk magic made them invaluable to their communities, but also potentially dangerous in the eyes of church authorities. A wise woman whose patients recovered was blessed by God, but one whose treatments failed might be trafficking with demons. The same herbs and incantations that could heal could also harm, making the wise woman both protector and potential threat. The medieval understanding of mental illness was deeply influenced by supernatural beliefs about demonic possession and divine punishment. Madness wasn't simply a medical condition, but a spiritual crisis that required religious as well as physical intervention. The symptoms of mental illness were interpreted as evidence of supernatural influence, either divine inspiration that manifested as prophetic visions, or demonic possession that caused violent or erratic behavior. Treatment for madness involved elaborate exorcism rituals designed to drive out evil spirits and restore the patient's spiritual balance. Holy water was used to bless the afflicted person, while blessed oil was applied to their forehead in the sign of the cross. Sacred relics were placed on their body to provide divine protection, while prayers and hymns created a protective spiritual atmosphere. The entire community might participate in these healing rituals, as mental illness was seen as a threat to collective spiritual health that required collective response. The medieval calendar of saints' days provided supernatural protection for virtually every aspect of human experience, but also created complex obligations and restrictions that governed daily life. Each saint's feast day brought specific spiritual opportunities and dangers that required appropriate ritual response. St. Bartholomew's Day was ideal for blessing fruit trees and vineyards, while St. Martin's Day marked the proper time for slaughtering livestock for winter preservation. The 12 days of Christmas weren't just a festive celebration, but a dangerous supernatural period when the normal boundaries between worlds became permeable. Spirits of the dead could return to visit the living, while demons gained unusual power to tempt and corrupt the faithful. Each night required specific protective rituals, burning blessed candles, scattering holy water, reciting protective prayers, and avoiding activities that might attract malevolent attention. 12th night, the culmination of this supernatural season, was both the most dangerous and most auspicious time of the year. Divination rituals performed on this night were believed to reveal the future with unusual accuracy, while protective spells cast during these hours would remain effective throughout the coming year. Young people would perform elaborate fortune-telling ceremonies to discover their romantic fates, while farmers would attempt to predict weather patterns for the entire agricultural season. The medieval understanding of natural disasters reflected beliefs about divine judgment and supernatural warfare that made human response as much spiritual as practical. Earthquakes weren't simply geological events, but signs of God's displeasure with human sin that required immediate repentance and reform. The earth itself was shaking with divine anger, and only collective spiritual purification could restore stability. Volcanic eruptions were interpreted as literal openings of hell, allowing demonic forces to escape into the earthly realm. The sulfurous smoke and molten rock were evidence of infernal activity that threatened not just physical safety, but spiritual corruption of entire regions. Response to volcanic disasters involved mass prayers, processions with sacred relics, and sometimes wholesale migration to escape areas believed to be under direct demonic influence. Plagues and epidemics were understood as divine punishment for collective sin that required both medical treatment and spiritual purification. The Black Death that devastated 14th century Europe was interpreted by many as a sign of approaching apocalypse, God's final judgment on a corrupted world. Response involved not just quarantine and medical care, but also elaborate penitential rituals designed to appease divine wrath and restore spiritual health to afflicted communities. The medieval understanding of time itself was shaped by supernatural beliefs that seem foreign to our modern linear conception of temporal progression. Time wasn't simply a neutral medium through which events occurred, but a spiritually charged dimension where past, present, and future interpenetrated in complex ways. The liturgical calendar wasn't just a schedule of religious observances, but a sacred pattern that aligned human activities with divine intentions. Certain hours of the day were considered more spiritually potent than others, requiring specific prayers and protections. The hour before dawn was particularly dangerous, as demons were believed to be most active during this liminal time between night and day. Noon was a time of spiritual clarity, when prayers were most effective and divine visions most likely to occur. Midnight marked the boundary between days and was considered an ideal time for both benevolent and malevolent magic. The medieval week followed supernatural as well as practical rhythms, with each day governed by planetary influences that affected human behavior and fortune. Monday belonged to the moon, making it ideal for activities involving change, travel, and emotional matters. Tuesday was ruled by Mars, favoring warfare, competition, and physical challenges. Wednesday answered to Mercury, supporting communication, learning, and commerce. Thursday served Jupiter, blessing legal matters, spiritual growth, and leadership. Friday followed Venus, encouraging love, beauty, and artistic creation. Saturday belonged to Saturn, supporting discipline, hard work, and long-term planning. Sunday honored the sun, making it perfect for spiritual activities and community gatherings. The seasonal cycle wasn't simply a natural phenomenon, but a cosmic drama of death and rebirth that required human participation to ensure its proper continuation. Winter wasn't just cold weather, but a spiritual trial that tested the community's faith and endurance. Spring wasn't simply warming temperatures, but a divine gift that required gratitude and celebration. Summer wasn't just growing seasons, but a time of spiritual abundance that demanded proper stewardship. Autumn wasn't simply harvest time, but a moment of cosmic accounting when the year's spiritual balance was calculated. Medieval agricultural practices were thoroughly integrated with supernatural beliefs about cosmic influences on plant and animal life. Planting had to be timed not just according to weather patterns, but according to lunar phases and astrological configurations that would ensure divine blessing on the crops. Seeds planted during a waxing moon would grow strong and healthy, while those planted during a waning moon might fail to thrive or produce inferior yields. The treatment of livestock involved elaborate rituals designed to protect animals from supernatural threats and ensure their health and productivity. Cattle were blessed with holy water at regular intervals, while their stalls were decorated with protective herbs and symbols. Horses received special attention as creatures particularly vulnerable to demonic influence. Their manes were braided with blessed threads, and iron shoes were carefully fitted not just for practical protection, but as spiritual armor against evil spirits. The medieval understanding of geography was shaped by supernatural beliefs about sacred and profane spaces that determined where human communities could safely establish themselves. Crossroads were considered particularly dangerous locations where demons congregated and malevolent magic was most effective. Churches were deliberately built at crossroads to neutralize these evil influences and provide spiritual protection for travelers forced to pass through such perilous areas. Rivers and streams weren't simply water sources, but spiritual boundaries that separated different supernatural realms. Crossing water required prayers and protective rituals, as evil spirits were believed to be unable to cross running water without permission from their victims. Bridges became sacred structures that required blessing and protection, while fords and ferry crossings were often marked with shrines and protective symbols. Mountains and hills were understood as natural cathedrals, where heaven and earth approached most closely, making them ideal locations for monasteries and pilgrimage sites. But these elevated places were also dangerous, as they attracted supernatural forces, both benevolent and malevolent. Climbing mountains required spiritual as well as physical preparation, with prayers and protective amulets as essential as ropes and provisions. Forests represented the ultimate wilderness, where civilization's protective influence was weakest and supernatural forces roamed freely. Entering woodlands required elaborate protective rituals and careful attention to supernatural signs that might warn of approaching danger. Certain trees were considered sacred, and cutting them without proper ceremony could bring divine retribution, while other trees were believed to harbor evil spirits and were avoided entirely. The medieval understanding of human relationships was deeply influenced by supernatural beliefs about spiritual compatibility and cosmic influence on emotional bonds. Marriage wasn't simply a social contract, but a sacred union that required divine blessing and protection from demonic interference. Wedding ceremonies included elaborate rituals designed to ensure spiritual harmony between the couple and protect them from supernatural threats to their union. The timing of weddings was carefully calculated according to lunar phases, seasonal cycles, and astrological configurations that would provide the most favorable supernatural influences for the new marriage. May was considered particularly unlucky for weddings, as it was the month when evil spirits were most active and likely to corrupt the sacred bond between husband and wife. June was ideal because it honored Juno, the Roman goddess of marriage who had been Christianized as a protective saint. The treatment of pregnancy and childbirth involved extensive supernatural protections designed to shield both mother and child from demonic interference during their most vulnerable time. Expectant mothers wore protective amulets and recited specific prayers at regular intervals throughout their pregnancy. The birthing chamber was blessed with holy water and decorated with sacred symbols, while iron objects were placed around the bed to ward off evil spirits. The medieval understanding of education was shaped by supernatural beliefs about divine inspiration and demonic temptation in the pursuit of knowledge. Learning wasn't simply the acquisition of information, but a spiritual discipline that required protection from evil influences that might corrupt the mind or lead students away from divine truth. Schools and universities were established under religious authority to ensure that secular knowledge remained subordinate to spiritual wisdom. Books themselves were considered sacred objects imbued with supernatural power that required careful handling and protection. Manuscripts were copied by monks who prayed continuously during their work to ensure divine guidance and protection from errors that might corrupt sacred texts. Libraries were blessed spaces where knowledge was preserved under divine protection, while the act of reading was often accompanied by prayers for spiritual illumination and understanding. The medieval understanding of craftsmanship and trade was influenced by supernatural beliefs about divine blessing and protection for honest labor. Each profession had its patron saint who provided spiritual guidance and protection for practitioners who honored their craft with integrity and skill. Blacksmiths served Eligius, carpenters followed Joseph, and masons honored Stephen, creating spiritual communities within secular trades. Guild ceremonies weren't simply professional organizations, but religious brotherhoods that combined practical training with spiritual formation. Apprentices took sacred oaths before religious altars, promising not just to learn their trade, but to practice it according to divine law and Christian virtue. Master craftsmen were expected to provide spiritual as well as technical guidance, ensuring that their students developed moral character alongside professional skill. The medieval understanding of government and law was deeply influenced by supernatural beliefs about divine authority and cosmic justice. Kings weren't simply political leaders, but sacred figures appointed by God to maintain earthly order according to divine will. Royal ceremonies included elaborate rituals designed to invoke divine blessing and protection for rulers who accepted the spiritual responsibility of their office. Legal proceedings weren't simply human attempts to determine truth, but sacred processes that invited divine intervention to ensure justice. Trial by ordeal wasn't primitive superstition, but sophisticated theology that trusted God to protect the innocent and expose the guilty through supernatural signs. Judges and juries prayed for divine guidance before rendering verdicts, recognizing their dependence on supernatural wisdom to discern truth from falsehood. The medieval understanding of warfare was shaped by supernatural beliefs about divine favor and cosmic conflict between good and evil. Battles weren't simply political or economic disputes, but spiritual contests where divine will was manifested through human victory and defeat. Warriors carried blessed weapons and wore sacred amulets, while armies were accompanied by priests who provided spiritual protection through prayers and holy relics. The treatment of military defeats reflected beliefs about divine judgment and cosmic justice that required spiritual as well as strategic response. Losses in battle were interpreted as signs of divine displeasure that required repentance and reform before military success could be restored. Victory was understood as divine blessing that required gratitude and proper stewardship of the power God had provided. As we near the end of our journey through this landscape of medieval superstitions, it's worth reflecting on what these beliefs meant to the people who held them. In our modern world, with its scientific explanations and technological solutions, it's easy to dismiss these practices as ignorant or primitive. But for medieval people, these superstitions provided something that pure reason cannot: comfort in the face of uncertainty, meaning in the midst of suffering, and hope when natural explanations offered none. The medieval world was a dangerous place where death could strike without warning, where crops could fail despite careful tending, where loved ones could sicken and die despite desperate care. In such a world, supernatural explanations weren't luxuries, but necessities, ways of making sense of chaos and maintaining hope when reason alone proved insufficient. These beliefs also created communities bound together by shared understanding of cosmic order and mutual responsibility for maintaining spiritual health. When the entire village participated in blessing the fields or protecting against demons, individual suffering became collective concern, and personal faith became community strength. Perhaps most importantly, these superstitions acknowledge the mystery and wonder that surround human existence. Medieval people lived in a universe alive with meaning, where every action mattered and every moment held potential for divine encounter. Their world was frightening but never meaningless, dangerous but never empty of hope. As you drift off to sleep tonight, surrounded by the safety and comfort of the modern world, Perhaps you can find something valuable in the medieval experience. Not the fear or the restrictions, but the sense of living in a universe where everything is connected, where mystery remains possible, and where hope persists even in the darkest times. The next time you see a shooting star or hear an owl calling in the night, the next time you feel a sudden chill or notice an unusual cloud formation, remember our medieval ancestors who saw in such moments not just natural phenomena, but glimpses of the sacred breaking through into ordinary time. Perhaps in our rush to explain everything, we've lost something they possessed: the ability to be amazed, to remain open to wonder, to live with mystery rather than demanding that every question have a simple answer. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may your rest be peaceful and your dreams filled with the gentle magic that our ancestors knew was always just beyond the veil of ordinary sight. Looking at your script summary and the reference materials, I'll continue part 2 focusing on the fascinating world of medieval beliefs and superstitions. Here's the continuation. Yet for all the grand ceremonies and sacred rituals, the medieval world was also governed by beliefs that would seem utterly bizarre to our modern minds. The line between the sacred and the superstitious was often impossibly thin, creating a tapestry of practices that shaped every aspect of daily existence. Consider the medieval belief in the power of sympathetic magic, where like was thought to influence like. A red stone might be used to treat bleeding, while yellow herbs were prescribed for jaundice. The doctrine of signatures suggested that God had marked every plant and mineral, with signs indicating their proper use. A walnut, resembling a brain, was naturally suited to treating head ailments. Lungwort, with its spotted leaves that looked like diseased lungs, was the obvious remedy for respiratory troubles. These weren't merely folk remedies practiced in shadowy corners. The most learned physicians of the age, trained in the great universities of Paris and Bologna, prescribed treatments based on these principles. The human body was understood as a microcosm of the universe itself, governed by the same forces that moved the stars and changed the seasons. The medieval calendar was a complex web of auspicious and unlucky days. Egyptian days, believed to be cursed since ancient times, were scattered throughout the year when no important business should be undertaken. January 1st was one such day, as was April 10th and December 7th. To begin a journey, sign a contract, or even cut one's hair on these dates was to court disaster. Monday was considered unlucky for bleeding a patient, while Tuesday was inauspicious for travel. Friday, the day of Christ's crucifixion, carried its own set of prohibitions. Sailors refused to set sail on Friday, and many would not begin any new enterprise on this day. The very structure of time itself was imbued with spiritual significance. The medieval mind saw portents and omens in every unusual occurrence. A dog howling at night might herald death in the household. Spilling salt was an omen of quarrels to come, leading to the practice of throwing a pinch over the left shoulder to blind the devil who lurked there. A candle flame that burned blue indicated the presence of spirits, while a hen that crowed like a rooster was a sure sign of misfortune ahead. Birds were particularly potent carriers of supernatural messages. Ravens gathering near a house foretold death within. Owls hooting during daylight hours warned of calamity. But magpies carried the most complex omens of all, their numbers revealing different fates: 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret never to be told. The human body itself was a landscape of supernatural significance. An itchy right palm meant money was coming, while an itchy left palm suggested money would soon be lost. A ringing in the right ear meant someone was speaking well of you, but ringing in the left ear indicated gossip and slander. Hiccups meant someone was thinking of you, and sneezing was so portentous that it required an immediate blessing to ward off evil. Dreams were windows into the future, but their meanings required careful interpretation. To dream of clear water foretold good fortune, while muddy water warned of troubles ahead. Dreams of the dead carried messages from beyond the grave, often revealing hidden treasures or warning of dangers. A dream of losing teeth predicted the death of a family member, while dreaming of fire promised passion and change. The practice of fortune-telling flourished in countless forms. Palmistry revealed destiny written in the lines of the hand. The long lifeline promised longevity, while a broken line warned of illness or sudden change. The heartline spoke of romantic fortunes, and the headline revealed intellectual capacity and wisdom. Scrying, the art of divination through gazing into reflective surfaces, was practiced by learned scholars and village-wise women alike. Crystal balls, mirrors, and bowls of water all served as windows into the future. The shapes and shadows that appeared in these surfaces were carefully interpreted to reveal coming events. Even the way candles burned could reveal hidden truths. A flame that leaned to the left warned of enemies, while one that leaned right promised the favor of friends. A candle that burned with a tall, steady flame indicated good fortune, but one that guttered and smoked foretold trouble ahead. The medieval world was alive with invisible forces that required constant vigilance and protection. Iron was the great defender against evil, which is why horseshoes were hung above doorways and iron nails were driven into thresholds. Running water was another powerful barrier against malevolent spirits, who were believed unable to cross streams or rivers. Salt, that precious commodity, was more than a preservative and flavoring. It was a spiritual cleanser used to purify spaces and protect against evil influences. Bread baked on Good Friday would never spoil and could cure illness when consumed. Holy water, blessed by priests, was sprinkled in homes and carried on journeys to ward off harm. The mandrake root, with its vaguely human shape, was perhaps the most feared and coveted of all magical plants. Legend held that it shrieked when pulled from the earth, and this cry could kill anyone who heard it. Those brave enough to harvest mandrake employed elaborate rituals, using dogs to pull the root while stopping their ears with wax. The root, once obtained, was said to bring wealth and protect against harm. Garlic was another powerful protective plant, hung in braids around homes to repel vampires and evil spirits. Rowan trees, with their bright red berries, were planted near houses for protection, and their wood was carved into crosses and charms. Vervain, known as the holy herb, could break curses and reveal the presence of witches. The medieval understanding of illness was deeply intertwined with supernatural beliefs. Disease was often seen as punishment for sin or the result of curses and evil spells. A sudden illness might be attributed to the evil eye cast by a jealous neighbor or rival. The patient's recovery depended not just on herbal remedies and bloodletting, but on prayers, pilgrimages, and the intercession of saints. Epilepsy was known as the falling sickness and was often attributed to demonic possession. The sight of someone in the throes of a seizure was terrifying to medieval observers, who saw in the convulsions evidence of supernatural forces at work. Only the most powerful prayers and exorcisms could hope to drive out such demons. Mental illness was similarly misunderstood, often blamed on sin, witchcraft, or divine punishment. Those afflicted might be seen as touched by God, their ravings interpreted as prophetic utterances. Others were viewed with suspicion and fear, their condition attributed to trafficking with dark forces. The stars and planets were not distant celestial objects, but active participants in earthly affairs. Each planet governed specific aspects of human life and character. Mars influenced war and conflict, Venus ruled love and beauty, while Saturn brought melancholy and misfortune. The position of these celestial bodies at the moment of birth determined personality, fate, and fortune. Astrologers were consulted before every major decision. Kings planned their coronations according to favorable celestial alignments, while merchants timed their ventures to coincide with auspicious planetary positions. Even the timing of medical treatments was governed by astrological considerations, with different parts of the body ruled by different signs of the zodiac. The moon's phases held particular significance, governing everything from agricultural activities to medical procedures. The waxing moon was the time for planting and beginning new ventures, while the waning moon was suited to pruning, harvesting, and ending things. Surgery performed during the wrong lunar phase was believed to result in complications or death. Children born under different moon phases were thought to inherit specific characteristics. Those born during a new moon would be long-lived and fortunate, while full moon babies were destined for fame and success. But children born during a lunar eclipse were marked by fate, often destined for unusual or tragic lives. The medieval world was one where the spiritual and material realms intertwined in ways that shaped every aspect of existence. These beliefs, far from being mere curiosities, formed the foundation of a worldview that provided comfort, meaning, and guidance in an uncertain and often dangerous world. They offered explanations for the inexplicable and hope in the face of despair, creating a rich tapestry of meaning that bound communities together and helped individuals navigate the complexities of medieval life. As we drift deeper into this exploration of medieval consciousness, we begin to understand how these beliefs shaped not just individual behavior, but entire societies. In a world where scientific understanding was limited and life was precarious, superstition and faith provided the frameworks through which people made sense of their experiences and found their place in the grand cosmic order. Looking at your script summary and the reference materials, I'll continue part 3 of your Medieval Superstitions series with a focus on specific supernatural beliefs and practices that dominated daily life. Here's the continuation. As we delve deeper into the shadowy realm of medieval superstitions, we encounter beliefs so pervasive they shaped not just individual actions, but entire communities and their understanding of the world around them. The medieval mind saw supernatural forces lurking behind every misfortune, every blessing, every twist of fate that befell ordinary people struggling through their daily existence. Consider the profound terror that gripped medieval communities when faced with unexplained illnesses. A sudden fever, a child's convulsions, or a mysterious wasting disease were rarely attributed to natural causes alone. Instead, these afflictions were often blamed on the malevolent influence of witches, demons, or the dreaded evil eye. The evil eye, in particular, was a superstition that transcended social boundaries, feared equally by peasants toiling in muddy fields and nobles dining in candlelit halls. This belief held that certain individuals possessed the power to cause harm, illness, or misfortune simply through their gaze. A jealous neighbor's lingering look at a healthy child, a beggar's resentful stare at a prosperous merchant, or even an inadvertent glance from someone with unusual eye color could supposedly bring catastrophe. Medieval people developed elaborate rituals to ward off this supernatural threat. They would spit 3 times upon encountering someone suspected of possessing the evil eye, make the sign of the cross, or mutter protective prayers under their breath. Mothers would sew small pouches filled with salt, iron nails, or fragments of blessed bread into their children's clothing. These talismans were believed to create an invisible shield against malevolent forces. Iron, in particular, was considered especially potent against supernatural threats. Horseshoes were nailed above doorways not merely for good luck, but as powerful barriers against evil spirits, witches, and demons who were thought unable to cross thresholds, protected by this sacred metal. The superstitions surrounding childbirth reveal the medieval world's deep anxiety about the vulnerability of new life. Pregnant women were surrounded by a complex web of beliefs designed to protect both mother and child from supernatural harm. They were warned never to look upon deformed animals or frightening sights, lest their unborn children be marked by what they witnessed. Expectant mothers would wear amulets containing fragments of saints' relics, believing these sacred objects could ensure a safe delivery and a healthy child. During labor itself, the room would be filled with protective rituals. Holy water was sprinkled in corners to drive away demons. Candles blessed on Candlemas were lit to invoke divine protection. Iron objects were placed under the bed to prevent fairies from stealing the newborn and replacing it with a changeling. The fear of changelings was particularly intense among medieval people, who believed that supernatural beings coveted human children and would swap them for their own offspring, leaving families with strange, sickly, or difficult children who bore little resemblance to their supposed parents. Weather patterns, too, were laden with supernatural significance. A sudden thunderstorm was not merely a meteorological event, but potentially the work of witches gathering for their unholy Sabbaths. Lightning strikes were interpreted as divine judgment, marking locations or individuals who had somehow offended God. Farmers would ring church bells during storms, believing the blessed bronze could dispel the demonic forces thought to ride the wind and hail. The changing seasons brought their own supernatural concerns. Spring's arrival was celebrated not just for its promise of warmer weather and growing crops, but because it marked the retreat of the dark forces that held sway during winter's long nights. May Day celebrations included rituals designed to ensure fertility and prosperity while warding off malevolent spirits. Young people would gather flowers and herbs believed to possess protective properties, weaving them into garlands and crowns that served as both decoration and spiritual armor. Harvest time was particularly fraught with supernatural anxiety. The success or failure of crops was often attributed to supernatural intervention rather than weather, soil conditions, or farming techniques. A bountiful harvest meant the community had maintained divine favor and successfully warded off evil influences. Poor yields, however, suggested that witches had cursed the fields, demons had blighted the grain, or the community had somehow fallen out of favor with God and the saints. The practice of leaving the last sheaf of grain unharvested stemmed from beliefs about harvest spirits who dwelt within the crops. This final bundle, often called the corn dolly or harvest maiden, was ceremonially cut and fashioned into a figure that would be kept throughout the winter to ensure the return of fertility in the coming year. To harvest every last stalk was considered dangerous, as it might anger these agricultural spirits and lead to barren fields in future seasons. Medieval people also harbored deep superstitions about the power of words and names. Speaking certain words aloud, particularly those associated with devils, demons, or evil spirits, was believed to summon these entities or invite their attention. Many supernatural beings were referred to only by euphemisms or nicknames, never by their true names, which were thought to possess dangerous power. The devil himself was rarely named directly, instead being called the Old One, the adversary, or simply him. This fear of naming extended to illnesses as well. Diseases like the plague were often referred to obliquely, as if speaking their names too plainly might attract their attention. The Black Death was called the Great Mortality, the Pestilence, or simply the Sickness, as if linguistic evasion could provide some protection against its ravages. Names held such power that they could supposedly influence a person's entire life. Children were often named after saints in the hope that their celestial namesakes would provide protection and guidance. Changing one's name was a serious matter, as it was believed to alter one's fate and relationship with the spiritual world. Some people adopted additional names or titles as they aged, seeking to accumulate more spiritual protection or to escape the influence of malevolent forces associated with their birth names. The medieval obsession with numbers reveals another layer of supernatural belief that permeated daily life. Certain numbers were considered inherently lucky or unlucky, sacred or demonic. The number 3 was particularly powerful, associated with the Holy Trinity, and used in countless protective rituals. People would cross themselves 3 times, knock on wood 3 times, or repeat prayers 3 times to ensure their efficacy. 7 was another number imbued with sacred power, associated with divine perfection, and used in numerous religious and magical practices. Conversely, certain numbers were feared for their evil associations. The number 13, particularly when it fell on a Friday, was considered especially ominous. This superstition was so strong that many people would refuse to begin journeys, conduct business, or make important decisions on such days. The fear was so pervasive that it influenced everything from wedding dates to military campaigns, with medieval people going to great lengths to avoid tempting fate on these cursed days. Dreams occupied a special place in medieval supernatural belief, seen as windows into the spiritual realm where messages from God, saints, demons, or the dead could be received. People paid careful attention to their dreams, often seeking out local wise women or clergy members who specialized in dream interpretation. Certain dreams were considered prophetic, warning of future dangers or revealing hidden truths about the present. Nightmares were often attributed to demonic visitation, prompting the dreamer to undergo purification rituals or seek spiritual counseling. The boundary between the living and the dead was far more porous in the medieval imagination than in our modern understanding. Ghosts and spirits of the deceased were believed to regularly interact with the living world, appearing to deliver messages, seek justice for wrongs committed against them, or fulfill obligations left incomplete at the time of their death. These supernatural encounters were taken seriously, with elaborate rituals developed to communicate with spirits or to help them find peace and move on to the afterlife. Cemeteries and churches were seen as particularly active spiritual locations, where the veil between worlds was thin. People reported seeing ghostly figures wandering among the graves, hearing mysterious voices calling from empty chapels, or witnessing supernatural lights hovering over burial sites. Rather than being sources of pure terror, these phenomena were often interpreted as signs that the dead continued to care for the living and that prayers for the departed were needed. The medieval belief in supernatural transformation reveals the era's fluid understanding of identity and form. Werewolves, shape-shifting witches, and other beings capable of changing their appearance were accepted as real possibilities rather than mere folklore. Stories of people who could transform into animals, particularly wolves, bears, or birds, were widespread and taken seriously by both educated clergy and illiterate peasants. These transformation beliefs often intersected with ideas about spiritual possession and the nature of the soul. Some transformations were seen as divine gifts, allowing holy individuals to take animal form to escape persecution or to travel great distances in service of God. Other transformations were clearly demonic, representing the corruption of human nature through traffic with evil forces. The distinction often depended on the moral character of the individual involved and the purposes to which their supernatural abilities were put. As we explore these intricate webs of medieval superstition, we begin to understand how completely these beliefs shaped every aspect of daily life. From the moment of birth to the hour of death, medieval people lived within a world where supernatural forces were as real and immediate as the physical world around them. These beliefs provided explanations for the inexplicable, comfort in times of crisis, and a sense of agency in a world that often seemed chaotic and unpredictable. The rituals, charms, and protective practices that grew from these superstitions offered medieval people tools for navigating their uncertain world. Whether these beliefs were ultimately helpful or harmful matters less than understanding their central role in medieval life. They provided structure, meaning, and community bonds that helped people endure hardships we can barely imagine today. In our modern world of scientific explanation and technological control, it can be easy to dismiss these medieval beliefs as primitive ignorance. Yet they represent humanity's ancient and enduring need to find meaning in mystery, to exert some influence over fate, and to feel connected to forces greater than ourselves. The medieval world of superstition, for all its darkness and fear, was also a world where magic was possible, where individual actions could influence cosmic forces, and where the boundary between the material and spiritual realms remained beautifully, terrifyingly permeable. As we drift deeper into sleep, let these medieval voices whisper their ancient fears and hopes into our dreams. In understanding their supernatural world, we gain insight not only into the past, but into the enduring human need to find meaning in mystery and to believe that our actions, however small, can influence the vast forces that shape our lives. Here's part 4 of the strange superstitions that ruled medieval life script, continuing from where part 3 left off. The realm of medieval superstitions extended far beyond the boundaries of daily survival into the mysterious territories of the human soul itself. For medieval people, the line between the physical and spiritual worlds was gossamer thin, a veil that could be pierced by the simplest acts of devotion or transgression. They believed that every thought, every word, every gesture rippled through unseen dimensions, where angels and demons waged eternal war for dominion over mortal hearts. Perhaps nowhere was this cosmic battle more evident than in the elaborate rituals surrounding sleep and dreams. The medieval mind understood that slumber was not merely rest, but a perilous journey into otherworldly realms, where the soul wandered defenseless among spirits, both benevolent and malevolent. Before retiring each night, devout Christians would trace the sign of the cross upon their foreheads, lips, and hearts, creating sacred barriers against nocturnal demons who prowled the shadows, seeking entry into vulnerable minds. The bedroom itself became a fortress of spiritual protection. Iron nails were driven into bed frames, for demons were said to recoil from cold iron as if burned by holy fire. Sprigs of rowan wood, blessed by parish priests, were woven into mattress straw to ward off malicious spirits. Some families placed small bags of salt beneath their pillows, believing that evil entities could not cross this pure white barrier. Children were taught to sleep with their hands clasped in prayer, lest their souls be snatched away by prowling night terrors. Dreams themselves were windows into divine providence or demonic deception. A dream of clear water foretold good fortune, while murky streams warned of coming trials. To dream of birds flying toward the heavens meant prayers would be answered, but birds flying earthward spelled disappointment. Most fearsome of all were dreams of dead relatives, for these might be genuine visitations from purgatory, souls seeking prayers for their release, or cunning demons wearing familiar faces to lead the living astray. The interpretation of dreams required great wisdom and spiritual discernment. Village-wise women, often walking the dangerous line between healer and suspected witch, possessed inherited knowledge of dream symbols passed down through generations. They understood that dreams of bread meant abundance was coming, while dreams of empty tables warned of lean times ahead. To dream of fire indicated passion or purification, depending on whether the flames consumed or merely warmed. Dreams of serpents always carried ominous portents, for the snake remained forever linked to humanity's first temptation in Eden's garden. But dreams were only one pathway through which the supernatural touched medieval consciousness. The natural world itself pulsed with hidden meanings and mystical correspondences. Every herb, every stone, every creature carried symbolic weight in the grand tapestry of creation. Medieval people lived in constant dialogue with these natural signs, reading the book of nature as intently as monks studied sacred scriptures. The doctrine of signatures, inherited from ancient wisdom traditions, taught that God had marked every created thing with visible signs indicating its hidden properties. Walnuts resembling tiny brains, were consumed to enhance mental faculties. The spotted leaves of pulmonaria, echoing diseased lungs, made it a remedy for respiratory ailments. Bloodstone, with its red flecks, was prized for stanching wounds and strengthening the blood. This wasn't mere folk medicine, but a sophisticated worldview that saw divine intelligence embedded in every aspect of creation. Plants especially were revered as bearers of supernatural power. Mandrake root, with its eerily human shape, was believed to shriek when pulled from the earth, a cry so terrible it could kill any mortal who heard it. Clever herbalists employed dogs to harvest this potent root, stopping their ears with wax and fleeing before the fatal sound could reach them. The extracted mandrake became a powerful talisman for protection, fertility, and prophetic dreams, commanding prices that could bankrupt entire households. Vervain, the sacred herb of Druids and Christian mystics alike, was gathered at midnight during specific moon phases while reciting ancient prayers. This holy plant could break evil spells, reveal hidden treasures, and grant the power to see through demonic illusions. Medieval mothers sewed vervain into their children's clothing as protection against the evil eye and supernatural harm. Brides carried vervain bouquets to ensure faithful marriages, while soldiers bore it into battle as a shield against enemy weapons. The humble rowan tree, with its bright red berries and delicate leaves, stood as perhaps the most powerful guardian against evil forces. No witch could pass beneath rowan branches. No demon could inhabit a house built with rowan wood. No curse could take hold where rowan grew. Shepherds carved rowan staves to protect their flocks from supernatural predators. Farmers planted rowan groves around their fields to ensure bountiful harvests. Even kings valued rowan above gold, for what earthly treasure could compare to divine protection? The medieval relationship with animals transcended mere utility, entering realms of mystical communion and supernatural partnership. Cats, those enigmatic creatures that walked between worlds, were simultaneously revered and feared. Black cats especially carried dual natures, bringing either profound good fortune or terrible misfortune, depending on their behavior, and the observer's spiritual state. A black cat that approached with purring affection was a blessed messenger promising prosperity. But a black cat that fled or hissed foretold coming disasters. Dogs, humanity's loyal companions, were believed to possess supernatural senses that could detect invisible spirits. When dogs howled without apparent cause, medieval people knew that death approached their community. When dogs refused to enter certain areas, wise humans avoided those places as spiritually contaminated. Some dogs were even credited with the ability to see human souls departing at the moment of death, their mournful whimpers serving as requiems for the dying. Ravens and crows, those dark-winged messengers from otherworldly realms, carried prophecies in their harsh cries. A single raven perched upon a house roof meant a letter would arrive bearing important news. 2 ravens together foretold a wedding or birth. But 3 ravens gathered in council spoke of death approaching, their ancient wisdom carrying warnings from the grave itself. Medieval people listened carefully to corvid conversations, believing these intelligent birds possessed knowledge hidden from human understanding. Owls, those silent hunters of the night, were ambassadors from the realm of shadows and secrets. Their haunting calls echoed through medieval darkness, carrying messages from the spirit world. An owl calling from the east promised good fortune, but western owl cries warned of danger approaching. Most ominous of all was the barn owl's ghostly shriek, which medieval ears heard as the cry of souls trapped in purgatory, pleading for prayers to speed their release into heavenly light. The spider, that patient weaver in dark corners, was revered as a creature blessed with supernatural protection. To kill a spider brought immediate misfortune, for these small beings were said to have sheltered the infant Christ during the flight into Egypt, spinning webs to hide the Holy Family from Herod's soldiers. Medieval households welcomed spiders as protectors against disease and evil influences. Some believed that spiders possessed the power to absorb poisons from the air, their webs serving as mystical filters that purified domestic spaces. Even insects carried divine messages in their tiny movements and sounds. Bees, those industrious servants of sweetness, were thought to be souls of the righteous dead, working still to bring joy to the living world. When bees swarmed, they were announcing the arrival of prosperity. When they abandoned their hives, they warned of coming hardships. Medieval beekeepers spoke to their colonies as family members, informing them of births, deaths, and marriages, believing that bees would depart if excluded from household confidences. Beetles, particularly the sacred scarab, rolled tiny spheres of earth like miniature worlds, echoing the divine creation itself. Finding a beetle in one's home was considered profoundly auspicious, a sign that celestial forces were working to bring earthly blessings. Children were taught to make wishes upon beetles, believing these armored creatures could carry prayers directly to heaven on their iridescent wings. The agricultural calendar itself was woven through with supernatural observances that transformed mundane farming into sacred ritual. The blessing of seeds before planting involved elaborate ceremonies conducted by priests who sprinkled holy water while chanting ancient prayers for divine favor. Farmers chose planting days based on lunar phases and saints' feast days, understanding that crops planted during spiritually auspicious times would flourish under heaven's protection. Harvest festivals celebrated not merely human labor, but divine providence that had blessed the fields with abundance. The first fruits were always offered to God before any household could partake, acknowledging that earthly sustenance flowed from celestial generosity. The last sheaf of grain was often shaped into a corn dolly, a fertility spirit that would protect stored grain through winter and ensure the following year's abundance. Even the weather was understood as divine communication, requiring proper interpretation and response. Thunder was God's voice speaking judgment upon the earth. Lightning was heaven's fire, purifying the atmosphere of evil influences. Medieval people counted the seconds between lightning and thunder, believing this revealed how many months would pass before the next significant event in their lives. Rain patterns carried their own mystical significance. Gentle morning rain promised a peaceful day ahead. Afternoon showers indicated divine approval of human endeavors. But rain that began during church services was considered especially blessed, washing away sins and bringing spiritual renewal to the entire community. Some medieval churches collected rainwater that fell during Easter services, preserving it throughout the year as holy water for blessings and exorcisms. Snow was seen as heaven's blanket, covering the earth in divine purity and protection. The first snowfall of winter was greeted with special ceremonies, as communities gathered to make wishes upon the pristine flakes that carried their prayers directly to God's throne. Children were encouraged to catch snowflakes on their tongues, believing they consumed divine blessings that would protect them through the cold months ahead. Wind directions carried their own prophetic meanings deeply embedded in medieval consciousness. Northern winds brought purification and spiritual clarity. Eastern winds carried new beginnings and divine inspiration. Southern winds promised warmth, abundance, and answered prayers. But western winds were viewed with suspicion, for they blew from the direction of the setting sun, carrying whispers of endings, partings, and supernatural dangers that lurked beyond the horizon. The medieval understanding of time itself was thoroughly permeated with supernatural significance. Each hour of the day corresponded to different spiritual influences and appropriate activities. Dawn was the hour of new beginnings and divine inspiration, when prayers were most powerful and creative endeavors most blessed. Noon marked the height of divine power, when evil forces were weakest and holy rituals most effective. Twilight brought increased supernatural activity as the boundary between day and night thinned, allowing spirits to move more freely between worlds. The days of the week carried their own mystical associations inherited from ancient planetary worship but baptized into Christian understanding. Sunday belonged to the sun and divine glory, making it the most auspicious day for important undertakings. Monday was the moon's day, favoring feminine activities and emotional matters. Tuesday, ruled by Mars, was suitable for conflict resolution and courageous endeavors. Wednesday, Mercury's day, favored communication and learning. Thursday, governed by Jupiter, was ideal for business and legal matters. Friday, Venus's day, was perfect for love and artistic pursuits. Saturday, Saturn's domain, was reserved for somber reflection and penance. The months themselves were understood as chapters in an ongoing cosmic story, each carrying distinct spiritual energies and supernatural possibilities. January, named for Janus, the two-faced god of transitions, was a time for looking backward with gratitude and forward with hope. February brought purification and preparation for spring's renewal. March arrived with the power of new life, stirring beneath winter's retreating grasp. April danced with the energy of resurrection, as Christ's triumph over death was celebrated alongside nature's reawakening. May overflowed with fertility and abundance, when the Earth Mother showed her most generous face. June brought the fullness of light and the promise of harvest abundance. July blazed with the height of solar power and divine energy. August gathered the first fruits of human labor blessed by heaven. September marked the balance point between light and darkness. October whispered of coming rest and reflection. November spoke of death and remembrance. December completed the cycle with the promise of light returning to darkness, the eternal hope that sustained medieval hearts through their darkest hours. This intricate web of supernatural correspondences created a world where nothing was merely ordinary, where every moment carried potential for divine encounter or demonic interference. Medieval people moved through their days as pilgrims in an enchanted landscape, reading signs and portents in everything from bird flights to cloud formations, from dream symbols to chance encounters. They understood themselves as participants in a cosmic drama where their choices and actions rippled through unseen dimensions, affecting not only their earthly lives, but their eternal destinies. In this mystical worldview, superstition was not mere ignorance, but sophisticated spiritual technology, a complex system for navigating the treacherous waters between heaven and hell. These beliefs provided meaning, comfort, and a sense of agency in a world that often seemed chaotic and threatening. They transformed ordinary existence into sacred adventure, where even the humblest peasant could participate in the eternal struggle between good and evil, light and darkness, divine love and demonic hatred. As we drift deeper into the peaceful realm of sleep, we can almost hear the distant echoes of medieval bells marking the sacred hours, feel the protective presence of blessed herbs and holy symbols, sense the invisible guardians that watched over our ancestors as they surrendered to dreams. Their superstitions were love letters to mystery, attempts to maintain connection with the sacred in a world that pulsed with divine presence. In honoring their memory, we honor the eternal human longing for meaning, protection, and hope that transcends the boundaries of time itself. Looking at the structure and style of the reference videos, here's part 5 of the 12-part script for strange superstitions that ruled medieval life. History sleep. But perhaps nowhere was the supernatural more immediate and terrifying than in the realm of death itself. For medieval Europeans, the boundary between life and death was not a firm wall, but a gossamer veil through which spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, could easily pass. Death was not simply an ending, but a transformation, a journey into realms both wonderful and terrible, where the souls of the departed could still influence the living in profound and frightening ways. The medieval mind conceived of death as occurring in stages, each fraught with supernatural peril. The moment of dying was considered the most dangerous, when evil spirits would gather like vultures around the departing soul, seeking to drag it down to hell. Families would surround the deathbed with blessed candles, holy water, and sacred relics, creating a fortress of faith against the demonic hordes. Priests would perform last rites with urgent precision, knowing that a single misstep could damn the dying person for eternity. The very air around a deathbed was thought to shimmer with invisible warfare between angels and demons, each side battling for possession of the precious human soul. But death's supernatural influence extended far beyond the moment of expiration. The recently deceased were believed to maintain a powerful connection to the earthly realm for days, weeks, or even years after their passing. Medieval people lived in constant awareness that the dead walked among them, invisible but ever present, capable of blessing or cursing the living according to their whims and the treatment they receive from their survivors. Proper burial became a sacred duty, whose neglect could unleash supernatural catastrophe upon entire communities. Bodies had to be washed with blessed water, dressed in sanctified garments, and laid to rest in consecrated ground, with specific rituals performed at precise times. A corpse buried without proper rites was doomed to wander the earth as a restless spirit, bringing disease, crop failure, and misfortune to all who had wronged it. Even the orientation of the grave mattered deeply. Bodies were always laid with feet pointing east toward Jerusalem, so they would be facing the right direction when Christ returned to raise the dead on Judgment Day. The medieval cemetery was not merely a place of rest, but a supernatural battlefield where the forces of good and evil waged eternal war. Consecrated ground was believed to hold protective power, its blessed soil acting as a barrier against demonic intrusion. But this protection came at a price. Suicides, heretics, and the excommunicated could not be buried in hallowed ground, lest their corruption spread to contaminate the entire cemetery and turn it into a gathering place for evil spirits. These unfortunate souls were relegated to crossroads, marshlands, or other liminal spaces where they would remain trapped between worlds, neither fully dead nor truly alive. The supernatural power of death permeated every aspect of medieval funeral customs. Mourners would wear black, not merely as a sign of grief, but as protection against the jealous spirits of the dead, who might seek to drag the living down with them. Funeral processions followed specific routes through towns and villages, stopping at certain crossroads and sacred sites to ensure the spirit of the deceased would not lose its way to the afterlife. Bell tolling served not only to announce a death, but to drive away evil spirits who might interfere with the soul's journey to heaven. Perhaps most chilling of all were the beliefs surrounding the revenants, the walking dead who returned from their graves to torment the living. Unlike the mindless zombies of modern imagination, medieval revenants were intelligent, purposeful beings driven by unfinished business or righteous anger. They might return to claim property they felt had been stolen, to punish those who had wronged them in life, or simply because they had been buried improperly and could find no rest in the grave. The chronicles of medieval Europe are filled with terrifying accounts of revenant encounters. In 12th century England, the monk William of Newburgh recorded numerous cases of the walking dead, terrorizing entire communities. One tale tells of a man from Buckinghamshire who died and was buried, but returned each night to his former home, bringing with him the stench of the grave and an aura of supernatural dread. The living man would beat upon doors and windows, calling out to his wife and children, his voice carrying an otherworldly echo that chilled the blood of all who heard it. Wherever he walked, a putrid smell lingered, and those unfortunate enough to encounter him would fall ill with mysterious ailments that no earthly medicine could cure. Such visitations were taken with deadly seriousness by medieval communities. When a revenant appeared, the entire village would mobilize to deal with the supernatural threat. The most common solution was exhumation and ritual destruction of the corpse. Graves would be opened under the supervision of church officials, and the body examined for signs of supernatural corruption. If the corpse appeared too well preserved, if it had shifted position in the grave, or if it bore any other signs of unnatural activity, it would be subjected to various purification rituals. Holy water would be sprinkled over the remains, prayers would be recited, and sometimes the body would be dismembered or burned to prevent further supernatural activity. But the dead could also be benevolent guardians and guides for the living. The spirits of deceased family members were believed to watch over their descendants, offering protection and guidance in times of need. Medieval people would pray to their ancestors, leave offerings at graves, and observe elaborate memorial rituals designed to maintain positive relationships with the departed. The Feast of All Souls' Day became one of the most important celebrations of the medieval calendar, when the living would gather in cemeteries to share meals with the dead, quite literally setting places at tables for their deceased relatives. The cult of saints represented the most powerful and beneficial form of supernatural death. These holy men and women had achieved such spiritual perfection that their deaths became gateways to divine power rather than passages to ordinary rest. The bodies of saints were believed to remain incorrupt in their graves, radiating healing energy and working miracles for those who venerated them. Pilgrims would travel thousands of miles to touch the tomb of a saint, believing that physical contact with these sacred remains could cure disease, grant forgiveness for sins, or provide supernatural protection against earthly dangers. The relics of saints became the most precious treasures of the medieval world, more valuable than gold or jewels, because they contained actual fragments of divine power. A single bone from a saint's finger could protect an entire city from plague, famine, or invasion. Churches competed fiercely to acquire relics, sometimes resorting to theft or fraud to obtain these supernatural treasures. The trade in relics became a major industry, with merchants and pilgrims carrying sacred bones, hair, and clothing across the length and breadth of Europe. Even ordinary death held supernatural significance for medieval people through the elaborate beliefs surrounding purgatory. This intermediate realm between heaven and hell was conceived as a place of purification, where souls underwent spiritual cleansing before entering paradise. But purgatory was not simply a theological concept, but a lived reality that connected the dead to the living through bonds of supernatural obligation. The prayers, masses, and charitable works performed by the living could actually reduce the suffering of souls in purgatory, shortening their stay in that realm of purification and hastening their journey to eternal bliss. This belief created a complex economy of supernatural exchange between the living and the dead. Wealthy medieval people would endow chantries, special chapels where priests would say masses in perpetuity for their souls. These installations represented massive investments designed to ensure supernatural welfare in the afterlife. The poor, unable to afford such elaborate provisions, relied on the prayers of family members and the charity of religious institutions to ease their passage through purgatory. Medieval people believed they could actually communicate with souls in purgatory through dreams, visions, and supernatural manifestations. The dead would appear to their living relatives to request specific prayers or masses, to reveal the location of hidden treasures, or to provide warnings about future dangers. These encounters were taken as literal truth rather than psychological phenomena, and entire family fortunes might be spent to fulfill the supernatural requests of deceased relatives. The haunting presence of death in medieval life extended even to the most intimate family relationships. parents would name children after recently deceased relatives, believing this would allow the dead person's spirit to continue living through the new child. Wedding ceremonies included elaborate rituals designed to gain the blessing of deceased family members, and major business decisions would be postponed until the spirits of dead ancestors could be consulted through dreams or divination. Medieval art and literature reflected this obsession with death's supernatural dimensions. The danse macabre, or dance of death, became a popular artistic motif, depicting death as a skeletal figure who came for people of all social classes, from peasants to kings. These images served as memento mori, reminders that death could strike at any moment and that the supernatural realm was always near. Churches were decorated with elaborate sculptures and paintings, showing the torments of hell and the joys of heaven, making the afterlife seem as real and immediate as the earthly world. The Black Death of the 14th century intensified these supernatural beliefs about death to an almost hysterical degree. As the plague swept across Europe, killing perhaps 1/3 of the entire population, people desperately sought supernatural explanations and solutions for the catastrophe. Some believed the pandemic was caused by the collective anger of the dead, who had been neglected by the living and were now taking their revenge. Others saw it as a sign of the approaching apocalypse, when all the dead would rise from their graves for the final judgment. Flagellant movements arose across Europe, with groups of penitents travelling from town to town, whipping themselves bloody in public displays designed to appease the wrath of God and the dead. These processions were believed to have supernatural power to drive away the plague, and entire communities would join in the self-torture, believing that their suffering could somehow balance the cosmic scales and restore harmony between the living and the dead. The plague also led to new forms of supernatural protection against death. Plague saints like Saint Roch and Saint Sebastian became objects of intense devotion. Their intercession sought to ward off the disease. Amulets and talismans depicting these saints were worn constantly, and their images were painted on houses and public buildings as supernatural shields against the pestilence. Special prayers and masses were developed specifically to combat the plague, incorporating elaborate rituals designed to harness divine power against the supernatural forces of death and disease. Even the disposal of plague victims took on supernatural significance. The sheer number of deaths overwhelmed traditional burial customs, forcing communities to develop new rituals for dealing with mass mortality. Bodies were often burned rather than buried, a practice that required special religious sanction because it seemed to interfere with the resurrection of the dead. Plague pits were consecrated with elaborate ceremonies designed to ensure that the mass graves would not become gathering places for evil spirits. The medieval understanding of death's supernatural power also shaped legal and social institutions in profound ways. Deathbed confessions were considered especially truthful because the dying person was thought to be already partially in the spiritual realm, where lies were impossible. Last wills and testaments were surrounded by supernatural safeguards, with elaborate curses pronounced against anyone who might violate the dead person's wishes. The crime of murder was considered not just an offense against human law, but a violation of cosmic order that could unleash supernatural vengeance upon the perpetrator and their entire family line. Medieval people believed that violent or unjust deaths created the most dangerous supernatural disturbances. Murder victims were thought to cry out for vengeance from beyond the grave, their unquiet spirits haunting the places where they died until justice was achieved. Battlefields were considered supernaturally charged locations where the spirits of fallen warriors continued to wage ethereal combat. Execution grounds were avoided after dark because the ghosts of the hanged were believed to gather there, seeking revenge against those who had condemned them. The supernatural power of death even extended to objects and places associated with mortality. Gallows were believed to possess magical properties, and pieces of rope used in hangings were sought after as powerful talismans. Graveyards were considered sources of supernatural ingredients for magical practices, with necromancers and witches supposedly gathering soil, bones, and other materials from tombs to use in their dark arts. Even the tools used by executioners and gravediggers were thought to be imbued with otherworldly power. As we drift deeper into the realm of sleep, we can hardly imagine living in a world where death held such immediate supernatural presence. Every funeral, every cemetery, every mention of the departed carried the weight of actual otherworldly power. The dead were not gone, but transformed, existing in a parallel realm that intersected constantly with the world of the living. Medieval people navigated this supernatural landscape with elaborate rituals and careful observances, knowing that a single misstep in honoring the dead could bring ghostly vengeance upon themselves and their communities. In this world where death was not an ending but a doorway, where the grave was not a final rest but a way station to other realms, the supernatural held dominion over the most fundamental human experience. The medieval understanding of mortality was inseparable from belief in spirits, souls, and otherworldly forces that shaped every aspect of existence, from the cradle to the grave and beyond, into the mysterious territories of the afterlife. Strange superstitions that ruled medieval life. History Sleep, Part 6. The medieval kitchen was perhaps the most treacherous battlefield of all, where the simple act of preparing a meal could summon forces both divine and demonic. Every cook, from the humblest peasant wife to the grandest royal chef, understood that food was never merely sustenance. It was a conduit for supernatural power, a vessel through which blessings or curses could flow with equal ease. In the shadowy recesses of castle kitchens and cottage hearths, an intricate web of culinary superstitions governed every aspect of food preparation. The very act of kneading bread required precise rituals to ensure the loaves would rise properly and ward off evil influences. Medieval bakers would carve crosses into their dough before placing it in the oven, believing this sacred symbol would protect both the bread and those who consumed it from malevolent spirits. They whispered prayers over their mixing bowls and never dared to bake on certain cursed days of the calendar, lest their efforts turn to ash or their customers fall victim to mysterious ailments. The brewing of ale and wine carried equally potent supernatural implications. Brewers understood that their craft walked a delicate line between nourishment and sorcery, as the mysterious process of fermentation was seen as a form of controlled magic. They would hang protective herbs like rowan and vervan above their brewing vessels, and many refused to begin a new batch during the dark of the moon, when evil spirits were thought to be most active. Some alewives were known to whisper incantations over their fermenting barrels, calling upon benevolent spirits to ensure their brew would be both potent and pure. The foam that rose to the surface during fermentation was carefully examined for omens. Too much foam might indicate the presence of malicious entities, while too little could suggest the batch was cursed to fail. Salt, that precious commodity that preserved food and life itself, was imbued with profound supernatural significance. Medieval cooks treated salt with the reverence due to a holy relic, for it was believed to possess inherent power against evil forces. Spilling salt was considered a grave misfortune that required immediate ritual correction. The unfortunate soul who knocked over the salt cellar had to quickly throw a pinch over their left shoulder to blind the devil who was surely lurking there, waiting to capitalize on the moment of carelessness. Many households kept blessed salt, sanctified by priests during special ceremonies, which was used not only for cooking, but also for creating protective barriers around homes and for healing purposes. The medieval spice trade brought with it not only exotic flavors, but also a treasure trove of magical beliefs. Each spice was thought to possess its own supernatural properties beyond mere taste enhancement. Cinnamon was believed to ward off plague and evil spirits, while also serving as a potent love charm. when added to food shared between lovers. Cloves were thought to enhance memory and protect against nightmares, making them popular additions to evening meals. Black pepper, so valuable it was sometimes used as currency, was considered a powerful protection against curses and was often sewn into small sachets and worn as amulets by those who could afford such luxury. The preparation of meat required perhaps the most elaborate supernatural precautions. Medieval cooks understood that the moment of an animal's death could influence the spiritual properties of its flesh. Animals slaughtered during certain phases of the moon were thought to produce meat that would spoil quickly or bring misfortune to those who consumed it. The blood of freshly slaughtered animals was never wasted, as it was believed to contain the creature's life force and could be used in various protective rituals. Some cooks would sprinkle a few drops of blood at the corners of their kitchens to appease household spirits and ensure their continued protection. The medieval understanding of food preservation was inextricably linked to supernatural beliefs. Smoking and salting were not merely practical techniques, but rituals that invoked protective powers. The smoke itself was thought to carry prayers and protective energies, which is why certain woods were preferred for smoking. Oak for strength and endurance, apple for love and harmony, and ash for protection against malevolent magic. The process of salting meat was often accompanied by specific incantations, and the salt used for preservation was sometimes mixed with blessed herbs or tiny fragments of holy relics to enhance its protective properties. Medieval gardens were cultivated not only for sustenance, but as living repositories of supernatural power. Every herb and vegetable was believed to possess specific magical properties that could influence health, love, prosperity, and protection. Garlic was perhaps the most revered of all garden plants, known for its ability to repel vampires, demons, and the evil eye. Medieval cooks would hang braids of garlic in their kitchens and add it liberally to their cooking, believing it would protect their households from supernatural threats. Onions were thought to absorb negative energies and diseases from the air. During plague outbreaks, many families would place cut onions in the corners of their homes, believing they would draw the pestilence away from the inhabitants. The timing of meals was governed by complex supernatural considerations that went far beyond simple hunger or convenience. Certain foods were never to be consumed on specific days of the week or during particular seasons, as doing so could invite misfortune or spiritual contamination. Fish was traditionally eaten on Fridays, not only for religious reasons, but because it was believed that consuming the flesh of land animals on the day of Christ's crucifixion could attract demonic influences. Many medieval households observed elaborate fasting rituals that were designed not merely for spiritual purification, but to align their bodies with cosmic forces and protect them from supernatural harm. The medieval feast was transformed into a complex ritual of supernatural significance, where the arrangement of food, the order of serving, and even the seating of guests could influence the spiritual atmosphere of the gathering. Wealthy households employed food tasters not only to detect poisons, but to identify dishes that might have been cursed or contaminated by malevolent magic. The host would often have the first bite of each dish blessed by a priest, or would personally taste it first to demonstrate that it was free from supernatural corruption. Medieval cooks developed an intricate understanding of food combinations that went beyond flavor to encompass spiritual harmony. Certain foods were never to be mixed, as their conflicting spiritual energies could create dangerous imbalances. Sweet and bitter flavors were thought to represent the eternal struggle between good and evil, and their combination in a single dish required careful ritual preparation to maintain spiritual equilibrium. Hot and cold foods were associated with different elemental forces, and their improper combination could supposedly upset the natural order and invite supernatural chaos. The storage of food was surrounded by elaborate protective rituals designed to guard against both physical spoilage and supernatural contamination. Medieval households would place iron nails in their grain stores to repel evil spirits, as iron was universally believed to be anathema to supernatural entities. Protective herbs like rosemary, thyme, and sage were scattered among stored foods, not only for their natural preservative properties, but for their ability to create spiritual barriers against malevolent influences. Some families would bury small religious medallions or fragments of blessed bread in their root cellars, believing these sacred objects would maintain a protective presence over their food stores throughout the long winter months. The medieval understanding of water carried profound supernatural implications that extended to all aspects of cooking and food preparation. Water drawn from certain wells or springs was believed to possess healing properties or protective powers, while water collected during specific lunar phases was thought to be especially potent for brewing and cooking. Many cooks would bless their water before using it in food preparation, making the sign of the crossover buckets and barrels to ensure the liquid was spiritually pure. During times of plague or illness, families would seek out water from holy wells or springs associated with particular saints, believing that food prepared with such blessed water would protect them from disease and malevolent influences. The medieval miller occupied a unique position in the supernatural landscape of food preparation, as the grinding of grain was seen as a mystical transformation that could be influenced by spiritual forces. Millers were often viewed with suspicion and reverence in equal measure, as their ability to transform raw grain into flour seemed to border on magical practice. Many mills were blessed annually by priests, and millers would often incorporate protective rituals into their daily work, such as carving protective symbols into their millstones or burning specific herbs while grinding grain. The flour produced by these sanctified mills was believed to create bread with enhanced spiritual properties, offering protection and nourishment to both body and soul. The medieval understanding of cooking fires elevated the simple act of food preparation to a sacred ritual. The hearth was considered the spiritual heart of the home, and the fire that burned there was thought to be a conduit between the earthly and divine realms. Medieval cooks would carefully tend their fires, ensuring they never completely died out, as an extinguished hearth fire was believed to invite evil spirits into the home. Special woods were burned during the preparation of important meals: holly for protection, oak for strength, and birch for purification. The smoke from these sacred fires was thought to carry prayers and protective energies throughout the household. Even the humble act of stirring food was imbued with supernatural significance. Medieval cooks understood that the direction of stirring could influence the spiritual properties of their dishes. Stirring clockwise, following the path of the sun, was believed to invoke positive energies and blessings, while stirring counterclockwise was thought to attract negative influences or even curses. Many recipes included specific instructions for stirring patterns, and experienced cooks would often incorporate protective prayers or incantations into their stirring rituals, believing that the circular motion would bind positive energies into their food. The medieval kitchen was also a repository of protective charms and talismans designed to safeguard both the cooking process and those who consumed the resulting meals. Bundles of protective herbs hung from rafters, iron horseshoes nailed above doorways, and small religious icons placed near cooking fires all served to create a network of supernatural protection. Many cooks wore specific amulets while preparing food, believing these personal talismans would prevent them from accidentally introducing negative energies into their cooking. The kitchen knife, that essential tool of food preparation, was often blessed and treated with special reverence, as it was believed that a cursed or contaminated blade could transmit malevolent influences to any food it touched. The medieval understanding of leftovers and food waste carried significant supernatural implications. Throwing away food was considered not only wasteful, but potentially dangerous, as discarded food could be used by enemies to create curses or harmful magic. Many households had elaborate rituals for disposing of food scraps, often burying them in specific locations or burning them with protective herbs to prevent their misuse. Some families would feed their leftovers to animals or give them to the poor, believing that such acts of charity would generate positive spiritual energy that would protect their household. The medieval marketplace was a complex battleground of supernatural forces, where buyers and sellers engaged in elaborate rituals designed to ensure fair transactions and protect against cursed or contaminated goods. Vendors would often display protective symbols at their stalls and burn specific incenses to ward off evil influences. Buyers, in turn, would examine their purchases not only for physical quality, but for signs of supernatural contamination. Certain vendors were known to specialize in spiritually pure foods, commanding premium prices for goods that had been prepared according to strict supernatural protocols. The medieval understanding of seasonal eating extended far beyond simple availability to encompass complex spiritual considerations. Each season was associated with specific spiritual energies, and the foods consumed during these periods were believed to help align the body with cosmic forces. Spring foods were thought to promote renewal and growth, summer foods to enhance vitality and protection, autumn foods to provide wisdom and preparation for the dark months ahead, and winter foods to offer spiritual sustenance during the time of greatest supernatural danger. Medieval physicians and healers understood that food was medicine, and medicine was often indistinguishable from magic. The preparation of healing foods required elaborate rituals and the precise combination of ingredients according to both physical and spiritual properties. Many healing recipes included specific prayers or incantations to be recited during preparation, and the timing of food-based treatments was carefully coordinated with lunar phases, planetary alignments, and religious observances. The distinction between cook, healer, and wise woman was often blurred, as those who understood the supernatural properties of food held positions of great respect and sometimes suspicion within their communities. The medieval understanding of hospitality carried profound spiritual implications that transformed the simple act of sharing a meal into a sacred ritual of protection and blessing. Guests were offered the best food available, not merely out of courtesy, but because proper hospitality was believed to generate protective spiritual energy for both host and visitor. The sharing of bread and salt with strangers was considered a binding ritual that created mutual obligations of protection and peaceful intent. Many households maintained special stores of blessed food, specifically for offering to travelers and guests, believing that such generous hospitality would ensure divine protection for their family. As the medieval period progressed, these culinary superstitions became increasingly elaborate and codified, creating a complex system of beliefs that governed every aspect of food preparation and consumption. The medieval kitchen was transformed from a simple place of cooking into a sacred space where the physical and spiritual worlds intersected with every meal. These beliefs provided comfort and a sense of control in an uncertain world, offering explanations for food spoilage, illness, and misfortune, while providing practical frameworks for food safety and preservation. The legacy of these medieval food superstitions can still be traced in many modern culinary traditions and folk beliefs. The practice of blessing meals before eating, the use of specific herbs and spices for both flavor and supposed health benefits, and the elaborate rituals surrounding holiday cooking all echo the profound spiritual significance that medieval people attributed to food and its preparation. In an age where survival often depended on the success of the harvest and the preservation of food through long winters, these supernatural beliefs provided both practical guidance and spiritual comfort, weaving together the sacred and the mundane in the most fundamental human activity of nourishing the body and soul. Looking at the reference materials, I can see a clear pattern for creating engaging, sleep-focused historical content. Here's part 7 of Strange Superstitions That Ruled Medieval Life, History Sleep. The shadowy realm between sleep and waking held particular terror for medieval minds, where the boundaries between the living and the dead grew thin as gossamer threads. In the flickering candlelight of midnight chambers, people whispered of the restless spirits that roamed the earth, unable to find peace in the afterlife. These were not merely the ghosts of folklore, but very real threats that required constant vigilance and elaborate protective rituals. Dreams themselves were considered windows into otherworldly realms, portals through which demons might slip into the sleeping mind. Medieval people believed that during sleep, the soul partially departed the body, leaving it vulnerable to spiritual invasion. This explained why nightmares felt so vivid and terrifying, why some people spoke in strange tongues while dreaming, and why certain individuals claimed to witness future events in their sleep. The church taught that dreams could be divine visions, diabolical temptations, or natural phantasms of the mind. Distinguishing between these required careful interpretation by learned clergy. Dreams of angels, saints, or biblical scenes were considered blessed visions, while dreams of demons, violence, or carnal desires were signs of spiritual corruption. Even the time of night when dreams occurred held significance. Visions near dawn were thought more likely to be true prophecies, as this was when the soul was preparing to return fully to the waking world. To ward off evil dreams and nocturnal visitations, medieval bedchambers became fortresses of spiritual protection. Crucifixes were mounted above beds, their sacred wood carved from trees blessed by priests. Holy water was sprinkled on pillows and bed linens, creating invisible barriers against demonic intrusion. Rosary beads were clutched in sleeping hands, their repeated prayers forming protective circles around the slumberer. The very herbs used to stuff mattresses and pillows were chosen for their supernatural properties, as much as their comfort. Lavender not only provided a pleasant scent, but was believed to grant peaceful sleep and prophetic dreams. Rosemary placed under pillows was thought to prevent nightmares and protect against evil spirits. Vervain, the holy herb, was sewn into bed curtains to create sanctified sleeping spaces. Even the direction one's bed faced mattered. Sleeping with one's head toward the east, the direction of Jerusalem and the rising sun, was considered most blessed. Children were especially vulnerable to nocturnal supernatural threats. Parents would place iron objects under cradles, as metal was believed to repel fairies and demons who might steal babies in the night, replacing them with sickly changelings. Amulets of coral, jet, or amber were sewn into infant clothing, their natural properties thought to absorb negative spiritual energy. Bells were sometimes attached to cradles, their tinkling sound believed to frighten away malevolent spirits drawn to innocent souls. The phenomenon of sleep paralysis, now understood as a temporary inability to move during the transition between sleep and waking, was interpreted through supernatural lenses. Medieval people called this terrifying experience being ridden by the nightmare, not the bad dream we know today, but an actual demonic entity that sat upon sleepers' chests, stealing their breath and movement. The Old English word mare referred to this supernatural oppressor, a malevolent spirit that fed on human fear and helplessness. Victims of the nightmare described remarkably consistent experiences, awakening to find themselves unable to move or speak, while a crushing weight pressed down upon their chest. Often, they reported seeing a dark figure looming over them, sometimes with glowing eyes or grotesque features. These accounts, shared across medieval Europe with striking similarity, reinforced the widespread belief in the reality of such spiritual attacks. Protection against the nightmare required specific rituals and objects. Iron horseshoes nailed above doorways were thought to prevent the creature's entry, as supernatural beings were believed unable to cross iron thresholds. Bags of salt placed under beds created protective barriers, as salt was considered pure and cleansing. Some people slept with knives under their pillows, believing that cold iron could wound or banish the attacking spirit. the medieval understanding of sleep extended beyond individual experience to encompass entire communities. Certain nights of the year were considered particularly dangerous for supernatural activity. All Hallows Eve, the night before All Saints' Day, was when the veil between worlds grew thinnest, allowing spirits of the dead to walk among the living. On these nights, entire villages would observe protective rituals, keeping fires burning throughout the night and posting watchers to guard against supernatural intrusions. Winter solstice brought its own terrors, as the longest night was thought to empower dark forces. The 12 nights between Christmas and Epiphany were considered especially perilous, when the Wild Hunt, a ghostly procession of supernatural hunters, was said to ride across the sky. Those who ventured outside during these nights risked being swept up in the phantom cavalcade, doomed to ride forever with the spectral host. Even the simple act of extinguishing candles before sleep required careful attention to supernatural concerns. Blowing out flames carelessly might inadvertently summon demons who rode on the wind. Proper technique involved snuffing candles with special implements blessed by priests, or covering flames with metal caps that trapped any evil spirits that might attempt to enter through the dying light. The position of one's body during sleep held deep significance in medieval superstition. Sleeping on one's back was considered dangerous, as this position left the heart and soul most vulnerable to spiritual attack. Side sleeping was preferred, particularly on the right side, as this was associated with righteousness and divine protection. Covering one's head while sleeping was thought to provide additional spiritual armor, creating a sacred cocoon around the most vulnerable part of the body. Mirrors in bedchambers presented particular supernatural hazards. These reflective surfaces were believed to be windows into otherworldly realms, capable of trapping souls or providing entry points for malevolent spirits. Many medieval households covered or removed mirrors from sleeping areas, especially during illness, as weakened souls were thought more likely to become lost in the mirror's depths. The timing of sleep itself was governed by supernatural considerations. Going to bed too early was thought to invite demonic visitation, as evil spirits were most active during the twilight hours between day and night. Staying awake too late was equally dangerous, as exhaustion weakened one's spiritual defenses. The ideal bedtime aligned with the church's evening prayers, when divine protection was strongest and evil forces temporarily retreated. Pregnant women faced additional supernatural threats during sleep, as their unborn children were considered particularly attractive to malevolent spirits seeking to inhabit human forms. Expectant mothers slept surrounded by protective amulets and blessed objects, their bedchambers transformed into sacred fortresses. Iron keys placed under pillows were thought to lock out evil influences, while pieces of consecrated bread sewn into nightgowns provided spiritual nourishment to both mother and child. The superstitions surrounding medieval sleep reveal a worldview where the supernatural realm pressed constantly against the boundaries of everyday existence. In the vulnerable hours of darkness, when consciousness retreated and the body lay helpless, medieval people felt themselves exposed to forces beyond human understanding or control. Their elaborate protective rituals and beliefs provided psychological comfort in a world where the line between the natural and supernatural remained forever blurred. Sleep, rather than being a simple biological necessity, became a nightly journey through a landscape of spiritual dangers and divine mysteries. Each dawn brought relief not merely from darkness, but from the supernatural perils that lurked in the shadow realm between waking and dreaming. These beliefs shaped not only how medieval people slept, but how they understood the very nature of consciousness, soul, and the invisible forces that governed their world. As you drift toward your own peaceful slumber tonight, safe from the supernatural terrors that haunted medieval minds, perhaps you can appreciate the simple blessing of rest, untroubled by fears of demonic visitation or spiritual attack. The darkness that once seemed alive with malevolent presence now offers only the gentle embrace of natural sleep, free from the elaborate protections our ancestors deemed essential for surviving the perilous journey through the night. Looking at the reference materials and the summary of your previous script parts, here's part 8 of your medieval superstitions series. As the abbey bells tolled complaint across the darkened landscape, medieval folk prepared for the most perilous hours of their day. For when darkness fell, the veil between worlds grew thin, and the supernatural forces that governed their waking hours became even more potent and unpredictable. Sleep itself was fraught with spiritual dangers, requiring elaborate rituals and protective measures that would seem almost incomprehensible to our modern minds. The medieval bedroom was not merely a place of rest, but a battlefield where the soul lay vulnerable to demonic attack. Before retiring, devout Christians would kneel beside their beds, reciting protective prayers that had been passed down through generations. The most common was a simple but heartfelt plea. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on. 4 corners to my bed, 4 angels round my head, 1 to watch, 1 to pray, and 2 to bear my soul away. This prayer served multiple purposes, invoking the protection of the 4 evangelists, while acknowledging the very real possibility that death might claim the sleeper before dawn. The positioning of the bed itself was a matter of grave importance. Medieval wisdom dictated that beds should never be placed with the foot pointing toward the door, as this was the position reserved for corpses being carried from the home. Similarly, mirrors were carefully covered or turned to face the wall, for it was believed that the soul, temporarily freed during sleep, might become trapped within the reflective surface, unable to return to the body upon waking. Mothers would whisper urgent warnings to their children about the dangers of sleeping with their mouths open, lest evil spirits enter through this vulnerable portal and possess their bodies while their souls wandered in dreams. The very act of dreaming was understood as a form of spiritual journey where the soul departed the physical body to traverse otherworldly realms. These nocturnal voyages were fraught with significance and danger. Dreams of the dead were particularly ominous, often interpreted as visitations from souls trapped in purgatory, desperately seeking prayers and masses to speed their journey to paradise. A medieval dreamer who encountered a deceased relative would wake with a heavy burden of responsibility, knowing they must arrange for prayers to be said or risk the eternal consequences of ignoring a soul in torment. Certain dreams carried prophetic weight that could influence major life decisions. To dream of clear, flowing water was considered a harbinger of good fortune and spiritual cleansing, while murky or stagnant water foretold illness or spiritual corruption. Dreams of flying were viewed with deep suspicion, as they might indicate that the dreamer was unknowingly practicing witchcraft, their spirit taking flight to attend diabolic sabbaths. Women who experienced such dreams often lived in terror, knowing that accusation of witchcraft could follow if their nocturnal visions became known to suspicious neighbors. The interpretation of dreams was not left to chance, but followed elaborate systems of symbolic meaning that had been codified over centuries. Animals in dreams carried specific messages. A white horse symbolized spiritual purity or the approach of death as a welcome release, while a black horse warned of coming sorrow or demonic temptation. Snakes represented wisdom or treachery, depending on their behavior in the dream. And birds were understood as messengers from the divine realm, their species and actions providing clues to their spiritual significance. Nightmares held special terror in the medieval imagination, understood not as mere products of an anxious mind, but as actual demonic attacks upon the sleeping soul. The very word nightmare derives from the medieval belief in the mare, a malevolent spirit that would sit upon the chests of sleepers, causing feelings of suffocation and terror. These supernatural assaults were taken so seriously that elaborate countermeasures were developed to prevent them. Iron objects placed beneath the pillow were believed to repel demonic forces, while certain herbs like vervain and rowan were sewn into sachets and hidden within the bedding. The phenomenon of sleep paralysis, now understood as a natural neurological occurrence, was interpreted as evidence of spiritual warfare. Sufferers would describe being pinned down by invisible forces, unable to move or cry out, while malevolent presences loomed over them. These experiences reinforced medieval beliefs about the vulnerability of the sleeping soul and the constant threat posed by demonic forces. Remedies included the recitation of specific prayers, the burning of blessed candles, and the sprinkling of holy water around the sleeping chamber. Children's sleep was protected by an elaborate network of charms and rituals that reflected both Christian doctrine and ancient pagan traditions. Mothers would place sprigs of rowan or elder beneath their children's cribs, believing these plants held protective powers against supernatural harm. Lullabies were not merely soothing melodies, but incantations designed to invoke divine protection, their lyrics filled with references to guardian angels and protective saints. The cradle itself might be surrounded by iron nails or blessed salt, creating a sacred barrier against malevolent spirits who were thought to be particularly drawn to the innocence of young souls. The timing of sleep was governed by both practical necessities and spiritual considerations. The hours immediately following sunset were considered the most dangerous, as evil spirits were believed to be most active during this transition from light to darkness. Many families would remain awake for several hours after dark, engaging in prayers, storytelling, or quiet work by candlelight, waiting until the darkest hours when demonic forces were thought to retreat before attempting sleep. The period just before dawn was considered the safest time for rest, as evil spirits were said to flee at the approach of daylight. Sleepwalking was viewed with particular alarm, understood as evidence that the soul had become detached from the body and was wandering in a state of spiritual danger. Sleepwalkers were believed to be especially vulnerable to demonic possession or fairy enchantment, their unguarded souls easy prey for supernatural predators. Families would go to great lengths to prevent sleepwalking episodes, tying sleepers to their beds or placing obstacles around the sleeping area. If sleepwalking did occur, the affected person would undergo extensive spiritual cleansing, including confession, prayer, and sometimes exorcism rituals performed by the local priest. The practice of sharing beds, common among medieval families due to both practical necessity and the belief in communal protection, created additional layers of supernatural concern. It was believed that the spiritual state of one sleeper could affect others sharing the same sleeping space. A person in a state of mortal sin might contaminate the dreams of innocent bedmates, while a particularly holy individual could provide spiritual protection for the entire household. This led to careful consideration of sleeping arrangements, with families sometimes separating members based on their perceived spiritual condition. Dreams of deceased loved ones required immediate and specific responses to prevent spiritual catastrophe. If the dead appeared in dreams requesting prayers, masses, or charitable acts, these demands were treated as urgent spiritual obligations. Failure to respond appropriately could result in the dreamer being haunted by increasingly aggressive visitations, or worse, being dragged into the realm of the dead. Entire families might impoverish themselves, fulfilling the requests of dream visitors, selling precious possessions to pay for masses, or giving away food and clothing to the poor in the name of departed souls. The phenomenon of shared dreams, where multiple people reported similar nocturnal visions, was interpreted as evidence of divine revelation or demonic deception. Communities would gather to discuss and interpret these collective experiences, seeking guidance from learned clergy about their spiritual significance. Such dreams might predict natural disasters, warn of impending invasions, or reveal hidden sins within the community that required confession and penance. The interpretation of shared dreams could influence major community decisions, from the timing of harvests to the need for collective prayer and fasting. Medieval medicine recognized the connection between sleep and health, but understood it through the lens of spiritual rather than physical causation. Insomnia was often attributed to spiritual unrest, requiring confession and absolution rather than herbal remedies. Those who slept too much were viewed with suspicion, as excessive sleep was associated with sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. The ideal Christian was expected to maintain a balance between necessary rest and spiritual vigilance, sleeping enough to maintain health while remaining alert to supernatural dangers. The bedchamber itself became a sacred space through the use of religious imagery and blessed objects. Crucifixes were mounted on bedroom walls, their presence serving both as protection and as a reminder of spiritual obligations. Holy water was sprinkled on bedding, and blessed candles were lit during times of particular spiritual danger. Some families maintained small shrines in their sleeping quarters, complete with religious relics and prayer books, creating a fortress of faith against the supernatural threats that stalked the night. As morning approached and the household began to stir, the successful completion of a night's sleep was cause for gratitude and spiritual reflection. Prayers of thanksgiving were offered for protection, received during the vulnerable hours of darkness, and any disturbing dreams were carefully analyzed for spiritual significance. The transition from sleep to wakefulness was understood as a daily resurrection, a small victory over the forces of darkness that sought to claim human souls during their most defenseless moments. The elaborate superstitions surrounding sleep in medieval times reveal the profound anxiety that characterized daily existence in an age where the supernatural was as real and immediate as the physical world. Every night brought renewed confrontation with forces beyond human understanding or control, requiring constant vigilance and unwavering faith. Yet within this framework of fear and uncertainty, medieval people found ways to create safety and meaning, developing rituals and beliefs that provided comfort and protection in a world where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural remained forever uncertain. These beliefs about sleep and dreams were not merely quaint folkways, but essential survival strategies in a worldview where spiritual warfare was a constant reality. They remind us of how profoundly different the medieval experience of existence was from our own, shaped by an understanding of reality, where the invisible realm held as much power and significance as the world that could be seen and touched. In the darkness of the medieval night, surrounded by protective prayers and sacred objects, our ancestors found ways to rest while remaining ever vigilant against the supernatural forces that shaped their understanding of life, death, and the mysterious realm that lay between them. Looking at the reference materials and the summary provided, I'll continue the script from where we left off, focusing on how medieval superstitions shaped daily life through rituals, beliefs, and practices that governed everything from personal hygiene to social interactions. The rituals and customs surrounding daily life in medieval Europe were steeped in supernatural significance, where even the most mundane activities carried profound spiritual weight. Consider the simple act of washing one's face each morning. Medieval people believed that water drawn before sunrise held special purifying properties, capable of warding off evil spirits that might have visited during the night. Women would often add herbs like rosemary or sage to their washing water, not merely for fragrance, but because these plants were thought to possess protective qualities against malevolent forces. The practice of personal grooming itself was governed by superstitious beliefs that seem almost quaint to our modern sensibilities. Cutting one's hair required careful timing, as it was believed that hair trimmed during certain phases of the moon would either grow back stronger or fall out entirely. Many people would save their hair clippings, not out of sentimentality, but from fear that if these fell into the wrong hands, they could be used in harmful magic spells against them. Similarly, nail clippings were carefully disposed of, often burned in the hearthfire to prevent their use in dark sorcery. The medieval household was a fortress of protective rituals designed to keep evil at bay. Horseshoes were nailed above doorways, not as mere decoration, but as powerful talismans believed to trap evil spirits in their curved iron embrace. Salt was scattered across thresholds, creating invisible barriers that demons supposedly could not cross. Even the arrangement of furniture held supernatural significance. Beds were positioned to avoid direct alignment with doors, as it was thought that evil spirits travelled in straight lines and could more easily possess a sleeping person whose bed lay in their path. The kitchen, that vital heart of the medieval home, was perhaps the most heavily protected space of all. Iron utensils were preferred not only for their durability, but because iron was believed to repel supernatural creatures. Bread was marked with crosses before baking, both as a blessing and as protection against evil influences that might spoil the dough. Milk was never left uncovered after dark, as it was thought that malicious spirits could curdle it with their mere presence, and a family's dairy cow might subsequently fall ill or cease producing milk altogether. Medieval people lived in constant awareness of the thin veil between the natural and supernatural worlds, particularly when it came to their interactions with animals. Cats, while valued for their ability to control vermin, were viewed with deep suspicion due to their alleged connections to witchcraft. A black cat crossing one's path was considered an omen of misfortune, though the interpretation could vary depending on the direction of travel and the time of day. Dogs, conversely, were seen as protectors against evil spirits, their keen senses supposedly allowing them to detect supernatural presence long before humans could perceive any danger. The medieval understanding of illness and healing was inseparable from supernatural beliefs. Disease was often attributed to spiritual causes, the evil eye, demonic possession, or punishment for sin. Consequently, medical treatment invariably included spiritual remedies alongside whatever herbal or physical interventions might be applied. Prayers were recited over the sick, holy water was sprinkled on fevered brows, and protective amulets were placed around the necks of the afflicted. Even the timing of medical procedures was governed by astrological considerations, with surgeons consulting star charts to determine the most auspicious moments for bloodletting or other treatments. The practice of pilgrimage, so central to medieval religious life, was surrounded by elaborate superstitions designed to ensure both physical safety and spiritual efficacy. Pilgrims would carry carefully selected collections of protective items, medallions bearing the images of saints, vials of holy water from sacred springs, and small bags of earth from holy sites. The very act of walking these sacred paths was believed to accumulate spiritual merit, but only if undertaken with the proper intentions and accompanied by the correct rituals. Some pilgrims would walk barefoot across rough terrain, believing that their physical suffering would be transformed into spiritual purification. Weather and seasonal changes were interpreted through a complex lens of supernatural understanding that governed agricultural practices and daily planning. The appearance of unusual cloud formations, unexpected frosts, or unseasonable warmth were all read as omens requiring specific responses. Farmers would perform protective rituals over their newly planted fields, sprinkling blessed salt around the perimeter and reciting prayers to agricultural saints. The first thunderstorm of spring was greeted with particular ceremonies, as it was believed to awaken the earth's fertility, but also to stir up dangerous elemental spirits that needed to be properly placated. The medieval marketplace was another realm where superstition and commerce intertwined in fascinating ways. Merchants would often begin their trading day with specific rituals designed to ensure good fortune, touching iron for luck, reciting particular prayers, or carrying talismans associated with their patron saints. The quality of goods was sometimes judged not only by their physical appearance, but by supernatural signs, bread that rose too quickly might be suspected of supernatural interference, while wine that fermented unusually slowly could be attributed to malevolent influences in the cellar. Social interactions themselves were governed by countless small superstitions that shaped daily behavior in profound ways. The simple act of sneezing required immediate spiritual attention, with bystanders quickly blessing the sneezer to prevent evil spirits from entering through their momentarily vulnerable body. Spilling salt was considered catastrophically unlucky, requiring immediate countermeasures such as throwing a pinch over one's left shoulder to blind the devil. Even casual conversation was peppered with protective phrases and gestures designed to ward off the evil eye or prevent harmful magic from taking hold. The medieval understanding of time itself was infused with supernatural significance that extended far beyond the church calendar. Certain hours of the day were considered more dangerous than others, with the period between midnight and dawn being particularly fraught with supernatural peril. Many people would avoid traveling during these dark hours, believing that evil spirits and malevolent creatures were most active when the sun's protective power was absent. The transition periods, dawn, dusk, noon, and midnight, were thought to be times when the barriers between worlds grew thin, requiring extra vigilance and protective measures. Sleep, that daily journey into unconsciousness, was surrounded by elaborate rituals designed to protect both body and soul during their vulnerable state. Beds were often blessed with holy water and surrounded by protective symbols. Some people would place iron objects under their pillows, or wear sacred medallions to prevent evil spirits from stealing their souls while they slept. Dreams were carefully interpreted for omens and divine messages, with certain dream symbols requiring immediate action upon waking. Protective prayers, visits to church, or changes in planned activities. The very clothes people wore carried supernatural significance beyond their practical function. Certain colors were believed to attract or repel various spiritual forces. Red was thought to provide protection against evil, while wearing black might invite misfortune unless balanced with protective amulets. The way clothes were put on mattered too. Donning a shirt inside out by accident was considered a sign of impending good fortune, while putting on the left shoe before the right could bring bad luck that would last the entire day. As we drift deeper into the realm of medieval superstition, we begin to understand how these beliefs provided not just explanation for the inexplicable, but a sense of control in an uncertain world. Every ritual, every protective gesture, every carefully observed custom was a way for ordinary people to feel they had some influence over forces far beyond their understanding. In a time when death could come suddenly through disease, accident, or violence, when harvests could fail without warning, and when the future seemed largely predetermined by forces beyond human comprehension, these supernatural practices offered hope, comfort, and the illusion of some measure of control over one's destiny. These beliefs were not mere superstition to medieval minds, but rather a sophisticated system of spiritual technology designed to navigate the complex and dangerous intersection between the material and immaterial worlds. Every protective ritual was a small act of defiance against chaos, every blessing a shield against the unknown. In this worldview, the supernatural was not separate from daily life, but woven into its very fabric, making every moment a potential encounter with forces beyond the merely human, and every day a careful dance between the seen and unseen realms that shaped medieval existence. Looking at the summary and reference materials provided, I'll continue the script from where it left off, focusing on strange medieval superstitions that haven't been covered yet. Here's part 10. While the structured world of medieval Christianity provided one framework for understanding the supernatural, countless folk beliefs and practices operated alongside, and sometimes in tension with, official church doctrine. These were the superstitions passed down through generations, whispered from mother to daughter, shared among neighbors, and carried across vast distances by travelling merchants and pilgrims. Perhaps nowhere was this more evident than in the realm of numbers and their mystical significance. Medieval people lived in a world where certain numbers carried profound spiritual weight, capable of bringing either blessing or catastrophe depending on how they were encountered or employed. The number 7, for instance, held extraordinary power in the medieval imagination. It appeared throughout biblical scripture: 7 days of creation, 7 deadly sins, 7 virtues, 7 sacraments. This divine association made 7 a number of completion and perfection. Medieval physicians prescribed treatments in cycles of 7 days. Builders incorporated 7 steps into church architecture. Even common folk would repeat prayers 7 times or perform daily tasks in groups of 7 to invoke divine protection. But if 7 brought blessing, 13 carried an almost unbearable weight of misfortune. The superstitions surrounding 13 guests at a table, harking back to the Last Supper, where 13 sat before Christ's betrayal, was so powerful that medieval hosts would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid this configuration. They would invite additional guests, exclude themselves from dining, or even cancel gatherings entirely rather than risk the catastrophe that 13 diners might bring. The number 3 held similar power, representing the Holy Trinity and appearing in countless medieval rituals. Farmers would walk their fields 3 times at planting to ensure good harvest. Mothers would rock sick children 3 times while reciting prayers. Even the simple act of knocking on wood, still practiced today, required 3 knocks to properly ward off evil. But perhaps no realm of medieval superstition was more elaborate than the complex web of beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife. Medieval people understood death not as a simple ending, but as a dangerous transition fraught with supernatural peril for both the dying and the living. The moment of death itself was considered particularly vulnerable to demonic interference. Families would surround the deathbed, maintaining constant vigil to prevent evil spirits from stealing the departing soul. Candles were kept burning, their light believed to guide the soul toward heaven while repelling creatures of darkness. Windows might be opened to provide the soul an easy path to paradise, while mirrors were covered to prevent the soul from becoming trapped in reflection. The preparation of the corpse followed strict supernatural protocols. The body had to be washed by those who had loved the deceased, as strangers might inadvertently trap the spirit through improper handling. Coins were placed on the eyes, not merely to keep them closed, but to pay the ferryman for safe passage to the afterlife. Salt, that powerful purifying agent, was sprinkled around the body to create a protective barrier against supernatural predators. Even the timing of death carried mystical significance. Those who died during a storm were thought to face particular spiritual danger, as tempests were believed to be times when the boundary between worlds grew thin. Deaths occurring on holy days were considered blessed, while those happening on Friday, the day of Christ's crucifixion, required special prayers and protections. The period between death and burial was fraught with supernatural tension. The corpse could not be left alone, as malevolent spirits might possess the empty shell, or the soul might return to animate its former body. Family members took turns in constant vigil, praying, telling stories, and sometimes even speaking directly to the deceased to comfort their spirit during this vulnerable transition. Medieval funeral processions followed routes designed as much for spiritual protection as practical convenience. The path to the cemetery often wound through the village in specific patterns meant to confuse any evil spirits that might be following the corpse. Mourners carried rowan branches, iron nails, or small bags of salt, all substances believed to repel supernatural threats. Church bells tolled not merely to announce the death, but to drive away demons with their sacred sound. The burial itself required precise supernatural protocols. The grave had to be oriented east to west, positioning the deceased to face the rising sun and the direction of Christ's expected return. Personal items were often buried with the dead, not from sentiment alone, but from the belief that the soul might need these possessions in the afterlife. Weapons buried with warriors, tools with craftsmen, jewelry with women, all served as supernatural insurance for the journey ahead. But the relationship between the living and the dead did not end with burial. Medieval people understood the boundary between life and death as permeable, with spirits capable of returning to interact with the physical world. This belief gave rise to elaborate customs designed to maintain proper relationships with the deceased, while protecting the living from supernatural harm. All Souls' Day, observed on November 2nd, represented the most formal acknowledgement of this ongoing relationship. On this night, the souls of the dead were believed to return to Earth, seeking prayers, remembrance, and sometimes unfinished business with the living. Families would prepare elaborate feasts, setting places at the table for deceased relatives and leaving doors unlocked so spirits could enter freely. These ghostly visits were not always welcomed, however. Souls who had died violently, in sin, or with unresolved grievances might return as troublesome revenants, unable to rest until their earthly concerns were addressed. Such spirits could bring illness to livestock, spoil food, or even physically attack the living. Communities developed specific rituals for dealing with these supernatural threats: prayers to bind restless spirits, exorcisms to drive them away, or sometimes even the extreme measure of exhuming and reburying corpses to grant them proper rest. The medieval understanding of ghosts differed significantly from modern conceptions. These were not mere shadowy presences, but entities capable of physical interaction with the world. They could speak, touch, move objects, and even consume food. Some returned with specific purposes: to reveal hidden treasures, to warn of impending danger, or to seek revenge against those who had wronged them in life. Perhaps most disturbing to medieval minds were reports of the recently dead appearing to demand that their debts be paid, their promises fulfilled, or their final wishes honored. Such visitations carried the weight of divine judgment, suggesting that failure to properly settle earthly accounts could trap souls in a supernatural limbo between worlds. The belief in returning spirits also shaped medieval attitudes towards suicide and excommunication. Those who had taken their own lives or died outside the Church's grace were thought to face particular difficulty in finding rest. Their spirits might wander indefinitely, neither fully dead nor capable of moving on to final judgment. Such souls were often buried outside consecrated ground, at crossroads where their confused spirits might be bound by the intersecting paths. Medieval people also developed elaborate systems for communicating with the dead through dreams and divination. Certain nights of the year, particularly during the 12 days of Christmas or on the eve of major saints' feast days, were considered especially favorable for receiving messages from departed spirits. Families would perform specific rituals before sleep, asking deceased relatives to appear in dreams with guidance or warnings about the future. The interpretation of these dream visitations required careful attention to supernatural signs. A spirit appearing in white garments suggested the soul had found peace in heaven, while dark clothing indicated suffering in purgatory. Spirits who spoke clearly delivered trustworthy messages, while those who whispered or spoke unclearly might be demons in disguise, seeking to mislead the living. This complex relationship between life and death extended into medieval attitudes towards cemeteries and burial grounds. These spaces were understood as inherently supernatural, places where the boundary between worlds remained permanently thin. Walking through a graveyard after dark was considered extremely dangerous, not merely from earthly threats, but from the very real possibility of encountering restless spirits. Yet cemeteries also served as sources of supernatural power that could be harnessed for protection. Soil from consecrated burial grounds was believed to carry protective properties, often gathered secretly and sprinkled around homes or carried in small pouches as personal talismans. Water that had pooled on graves after rain was thought to possess healing properties, particularly for ailments affecting the soul rather than the body. The medieval imagination also populated burial grounds with supernatural guardians, spirits of those who had been particularly holy in life and now served as protectors of the sacred space. These benevolent entities watched over the cemetery, preventing grave robbing and ensuring that the dead received proper respect from the living. As we drift deeper into the realm of medieval superstition, we encounter beliefs that governed not just life and death, but the very fabric of daily existence. These were the countless small rituals and observances that helped ordinary people navigate a world filled with invisible dangers and supernatural opportunities. The simple act of getting dressed each morning carried supernatural significance. Putting on clothing inside out was considered extremely unlucky, potentially inverting one's entire day and attracting misfortune. The left shoe had to be put on before the right to ensure proper spiritual alignment. Clothing that had been worn by the dead required specific purification rituals before it could be safely passed to the living. Even the direction one faced while performing daily tasks mattered deeply. Churning butter while facing east would ensure it set properly, while facing west might cause it to spoil. Sewing while facing north was thought to strengthen the thread's magical properties, making garments more durable and protective. Pregnant women were advised to always face toward the altar while in church, ensuring their unborn children would be blessed rather than cursed. The medieval world was one where every shadow might hide a threat, every blessing might mask a curse, and every ordinary moment carried the potential for supernatural intervention. In this intricate web of belief and practice, medieval people found not just explanations for the inexplicable, but a sense of agency in an uncertain world. The comforting illusion that through proper observance of supernatural laws, they might influence forces far beyond their physical control. And so the great tapestry of medieval superstition continued to weave itself through every aspect of daily life, binding together the earthly and the divine, the rational and the mystical, the seen and the unseen into a single, coherent worldview that would endure for centuries before finally giving way to the cold rationality of the modern age. Looking at the reference videos and your summary, I'll create part 11 of your 12-part medieval superstitions script. This should be around 1800 to 1900 words and continue naturally from where you left off, focusing on the comprehensive worldview where material and spiritual realms were inseparably connected. As we near the end of our journey through the shadowy realm of medieval superstitions, let us pause to consider how these beliefs formed not merely a collection of curious customs, but rather an intricate web that bound together every aspect of human existence. The medieval mind did not compartmentalize the sacred and the secular, the rational and the mystical, the seen and the unseen. Instead, these forces flowed together like streams converging into a great river of understanding that guided every decision, every action, every breath of medieval life. Picture, if you will, a master craftsman in his workshop as dawn breaks over a medieval town. Before he picks up his tools, he crosses himself and whispers a prayer to St. Joseph, patron of carpenters. He examines the wood grain carefully, not just for its practical qualities, but for signs that might indicate whether this is an auspicious day for his work. Perhaps he notices a peculiar knot that resembles a cross, surely a blessing from above. Or maybe the wood split in an unusual way yesterday, which could be a warning to proceed with caution. The craftsman's every movement is guided by layers of belief that have been passed down through generations. He knows that certain phases of the moon are better for beginning new projects, that particular saints must be invoked for different types of work, and that specific rituals can protect both his tools and his livelihood from malevolent forces. When he carves a door, he might secretly inscribe protective symbols on the inside, invisible to the casual observer, but powerfully present to ward off evil spirits who might otherwise torment the household. This interconnectedness extended far beyond individual practices into the very fabric of community life. Consider how the village church bells served not merely to call people to worship, but as a complex communication system that acknowledged the supernatural dimensions of time itself. Different bell patterns announced not just the hours of prayer, but warnings against approaching storms, celebrations of successful harvests, and calls for communal protection during times of spiritual danger. The sound of bells was believed to possess actual power against demonic forces. During thunderstorms, which were often interpreted as battles between good and evil spirits in the heavens above, church bells would ring continuously to drive away the malevolent forces causing the disturbance. The metal itself was considered sacred, having been blessed in elaborate ceremonies that imbued it with protective properties. Some communities would even melt down old weapons to create their bells, symbolically transforming instruments of war into tools of spiritual defense. Even the most mundane agricultural activities were saturated with supernatural significance. A farmer planting his crops was not simply placing seeds in soil, but participating in a cosmic drama of death and resurrection that echoed the central mysteries of Christian faith. The timing of planting had to align not just with seasonal weather patterns, but with lunar phases, saints' days, and careful observation of natural omens. The farmer might scatter blessed salt around his fields to create a protective barrier, or bury small religious medallions at the corners of his property to ensure divine protection throughout the growing season. When the first green shoots appeared, he would offer prayers of thanksgiving while remaining vigilant for signs that might indicate supernatural interference with his crops. Unusual growth patterns, pest infestations, or weather anomalies were all interpreted through a lens that assumed constant interaction between natural and supernatural forces. This worldview created a profound sense of human agency within a universe filled with invisible powers. Medieval people did not see themselves as helpless victims of arbitrary supernatural forces, but rather as active participants in an ongoing spiritual drama, where their choices, rituals, and faith could genuinely influence the outcome of events. A mother protecting her child with amulets and prayers was not engaging in empty superstition, but wielding real power against real threats in a world where the boundary between physical and spiritual danger was essentially meaningless. The medieval understanding of medicine perfectly exemplifies this integration of material and spiritual concerns. A physician treating a patient would certainly consider physical symptoms and remedies, but would be equally attentive to spiritual factors that might be contributing to the illness. Disease could result from sin, curses, demonic possession, or divine punishment, which meant that effective treatment required addressing both bodily and spiritual dimensions of suffering. Healing rituals often combined herbal medicines with prayers, blessed objects, and carefully timed procedures that acknowledged astrological influences. A physician might prescribe both a particular herb and a specific prayer to be recited while preparing the remedy. The patient's family would be instructed not just on proper dosages, but on maintaining protective rituals throughout the treatment period to prevent spiritual interference with the healing process. The success or failure of medical treatment was interpreted through this same integrated lens. Recovery was seen as evidence of divine favor, effective spiritual protection, or the physician's skill in addressing both physical and supernatural aspects of the condition. Continued illness might indicate insufficient faith, the presence of unconfessed sin, or the need for more powerful spiritual interventions alongside medical care. Travel and trade, essential activities in medieval society, were similarly governed by elaborate systems of supernatural protection and guidance. Merchants embarking on long journeys would seek blessings from multiple saints, carry protective relics and amulets, and carefully time their departures to align with favorable astrological conditions. They understood that success in business depended not only on market conditions and negotiating skills, but on maintaining proper relationships with the spiritual forces that governed fortune and misfortune. Trade routes themselves were mapped not just according to geographical features and political boundaries, but with careful attention to sacred sites, protective shrines, and locations known for supernatural activity. Successful merchants knew which saints to invoke for protection against bandits, which prayers could calm stormy seas, and how to recognize omens that might indicate the need to alter their travel plans or seek additional spiritual protection. The medieval judicial system provides another fascinating example of how supernatural beliefs shaped practical institutions. Legal proceedings often incorporated elements that acknowledged divine involvement in determining truth and justice. Trial by ordeal, though gradually falling out of favor during the later medieval period, represented a profound faith that God would intervene directly in human affairs to ensure just outcomes. Even in more conventional legal proceedings, supernatural elements remained significant. Oaths were sworn on sacred relics, whose power was believed to ensure truthfulness and bring terrible consequences upon those who committed perjury. Judges and lawyers understood that justice involved not merely human reasoning and evidence, but alignment with divine will and cosmic order. The punishment of criminals was similarly infused with spiritual significance. Public executions served not only as deterrents and expressions of social justice, but as opportunities for spiritual redemption and communal acknowledgement of moral boundaries. The condemned person's final moments were seen as crucial for their eternal destiny, leading to elaborate rituals designed to ensure proper spiritual preparation for death and judgment. These beliefs created a world where every human action carried potential supernatural consequences, where divine providence and demonic temptation were constant realities, and where the visible world was merely the surface of a much deeper spiritual reality. This was not a primitive or naive worldview, but rather a sophisticated system that provided meaning, guidance, and comfort in the face of life's uncertainties and dangers. The medieval integration of material and spiritual concerns offered several profound benefits that helped explain its enduring power. First, it provided a sense of cosmic significance to even the humblest activities. A peasant tending her garden was not merely growing food, but participating in the divine order of creation, cooperating with God's providence, and contributing to the spiritual as well as physical welfare of her community. Second, this worldview offered practical tools for managing anxiety and uncertainty in a world where life was genuinely precarious. When disease, disaster, or conflict threatened, medieval people possessed an extensive toolkit of spiritual resources, protective rituals, and communal practices that provided both psychological comfort and a sense of active agency in the face of overwhelming challenges. Third, the integration of supernatural beliefs into daily life created powerful bonds of community solidarity. Shared participation in protective rituals, collective responses to spiritual threats, and common understanding of cosmic order strengthened social cohesion and mutual support networks that were essential for survival in a harsh and unpredictable world. Finally, this comprehensive worldview provided a framework for understanding suffering and injustice that maintained hope and meaning even in the darkest circumstances. Medieval people could interpret their hardships as tests of faith, opportunities for spiritual growth, or temporary trials that would be resolved through divine justice in this world or the next. As we prepare to conclude our exploration of medieval superstitions, we can see how these beliefs formed not a collection of quaint curiosities, but a living, breathing system that gave shape and meaning to human existence in all its complexity. The medieval world was one where every sunrise brought new possibilities for both blessing and danger, where human choices carried eternal significance, and where the boundaries between earth and heaven remained beautifully, mysteriously thin. This rich tapestry of belief and practice created a world that was simultaneously more terrifying and more wonderful than our own, where miracles and curses were daily possibilities, and where the humblest peasant lived in constant awareness of participating in a cosmic drama of ultimate importance. In understanding these beliefs, we glimpse not only the medieval mind, but something essential about the human need to find meaning, connection, and hope in a world that often seems random and hostile. Tomorrow, in our final exploration, we will discover how these medieval patterns of belief have shaped our modern world in ways both obvious and hidden, creating legacies that continue to influence how we understand the relationship between the seen and unseen, the rational and the mystical, the individual and the cosmos. So as we drift toward the end of our journey through medieval Scotland's turbulent past, we can't help but marvel at the sheer resilience of those who called this harsh land home. From the fierce clan warriors defending their ancient honour to the humble peasants scratching out a living from the unforgiving soil, each carried within them that stubborn Scottish spirit that refused to bend or break. Though their world was one of constant struggle, where a failed harvest could mean starvation, where disease stalked every village, and where the clash of swords echoed through misty glens, they endured. They found moments of joy in simple pleasures, drew strength from their bonds of kinship, and held fast to their dreams of freedom, even in the darkest of times. So as you settle into the comfort of your warm bed tonight, spare a thought for those long ago Scots who faced each dawn with grit and determination, knowing that their struggles and sacrifices would one day pave the way for the Scotland we know today. Rest well, dear listener, and may their indomitable spirit inspire your own dreams.